So we're going to wait for just a minute till we get one. Moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand for the moment of silence.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, a few quick opening comments. First, you heard me ask if Pam was here. That's actually Dr. Davis Vaught, who is participating with us electronically today, as provided in our bylaws. The reason is medical, and her location is Bristol, Virginia. I think that satisfies. So if there's no challenge to that, we will move on. I will say, before we get to the election of president and vice president, how delighted the board is to be back in our own space. We appreciated the governor lending us Patrick Henry last month, but honestly, there's no place like home. And, it's kind of nice. It's also nice to have people coming back for a public comment, although, there you go. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause, because it has been a long while. I think it's been actually 18 months since we've been at a meeting in this room with, people. And so, glad to see we're at this point. My 2-year term, I guess, ends in a few days. However, today is the day appointed for election of president and vice president. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Gecker. We now open the floor for nominations for the president of the Board of Education.
With gratitude for your prior service, I hereby nominate Dan Gecker to continue serving as president.
I second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close nominations. We'll now vote on Mr. Gecker to serve as president of the Board of Education. Since we are in person, except for a roll call for Ms. Davis-Vaught, I guess, but we will, all in favor say aye.
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 And Ms. Davis-Vaught says aye. Any opposed? Mr. Gecker, you are once again elected president.
Thank you. I used to think being elected president was a recognition of skill and capability, and I've come to learn that what it really does is it recognizes the fact that I have no life outside of this. And so as the least busy board member, I get to do this for another couple of years. I will say that it has been a great privilege, honestly, to work with this group over the last 4 and look forward to, continuing the work as set out in the comprehensive work plan as we move on to the next 2 years. With that, the election of vice president, are there any nominations for vice presidents of the Board of Education?
Yes, President Gecker, I'm proud to nominate Dr. Jamel Wilson for her continued service, and I look forward to her continuing to lead us on our work. So, Dr.
Great.
Jamel Wilson.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Duran. Is there a second?
I second that.
Are there any other nominations? So seeing none, we'll close nominations. All in favor of Dr. Wilson being vice president of the Board of Ed for the next 2 years, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, thank you, Dr. Davis-Vaught. Any opposed? Clearly not. Dr. Wilson is the, second least busy person outside of the board.
Not true.
Who also has no life.
Who also has no life, and therefore, the leadership of the Board of Ed is determined appropriately for another 2 years. Thanks, everybody. And welcome to Dr. Anderson.
Good morning.
Good morning. We know you had a little bit of trouble getting into the building. We're happy to have you here, and you still have the honeymoon glow, so
Oh, thank you.
welcome and congrats and best wishes and all that. Happy to have you. All right, a quick note on the agenda. We will defer item H at the request of staff. We'll move that to the September agenda. First item then is the approval of the minutes from the June 16 and 17 meetings of the board. Is there a motion to approve the minutes or to amend?
Mr. President, I move that the minutes of the June 17th meeting be approved.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Vaught. Excuse me, Dr. Davis-Vaught. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yep, any opposed? Okay, as I said before, we are pleased to have people to comment in public. As always, we will continue to accept written public comment to the board's email inbox, boe@doe.virginia.gov. Speakers will be recognized in the order in which their request was received. Speakers must limit their remarks to 3 minutes each. When your time is up, please close your remarks promptly. We ask that you provide your name and affiliation at the beginning of your remarks. That's really for the minutes. You may provide copies of your comments. You can email a copy of your comments to Emily Webb, Director of Board Relations, after you finish speaking. I will say it is the habit of this board not to respond to public comment at the meeting. However, all people who comment are directed to appropriate staff response, so you can expect a response. So first, Reverend Robin Mines.
Good morning. I have copies.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Greetings. My name is Reverend Robin Mines. I'm a graduate of Richmond Public Schools, an Air Force veteran, a community leader, a pastor, and the founder of the Richmond Community Coalition. I am speaking today on behalf of a coalition of parents, community members, and stakeholders in Richmond Public Schools to express serious concern with the conduct of the Richmond School Board over the past 6 months. The board majority has acted in ways contrary to accepted standards of leadership and governance. It also has failed to prioritize its primary mission, improving educational outcomes for students at a time when many Richmond students have experienced learning loss and other severe challenges related to the pandemic. It is our belief that the failure of the school board to meet accepted standards of governance at both the procedural and substantive level is so severe that they mandate a review and possible corrective action by the state board. We have organized this letter into 5 crucial concerns. Failure to follow norms of good governance and proper procedure. Secondly, rejecting professional advice of the school administration and setting unrealistic expectations. Ignoring community input, failing to prioritize attention to reopening, needlessly delaying construction of badly needed new facilities. Our concerns result primarily from the way the Richmond School Board has, in recent months, handled the matter of school construction policy. But we are concerned about the broader implications of this pattern of behavior and decision-making for the remainder of the current board's elected term. We're counting on you to put our children first. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Tisha Irby. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Can you hear me still with the mask or didn't?
Yes, yeah, we're okay.
I'm a little nervous, but sorry. My name is Tisha Irby. I'm a graduate of George Wolf High School, class of 2007. I'm a parent of 5 boys, 4 of whom are RPS students. I am going to be reading our concerns with the school board failure to follow norms of good governance and proper procedure. On April 12, 2021, the Board of Men Agenda Men meeting to consider a motion from the school board representative Kenya Gibson for the board to assume full responsibility for construction of a new George Wolf rather than continue to partner with the city of Richmond on certain procurement and project management function to state open meeting laws and Freedom of Information Act requirement. This motion was not posted or distributed publicly prior to the meeting. As a result, there was no public notice of or opportunity to comment on this motion in advance of the school board vote. This signature policy shift and department from recent practice in Richmond was then adopted by a 5-4 vote. Citizens were denied their right to weigh in on the change because of the late addition. This action directs the RPS administration to create a new school construction division, despite the fact that RPS FY 2022 budget submitted 2 months earlier did not account for these positions. The resolution was inducted and passed despite the city of Richmond plan to release the RFP for a new George Wolf High School. Previously identified by the school board as its top construction the city went ahead and released the RFP anyway, with the hopes that it's doing so, the school board will come to a compromise and leverage the city procurement team instead of creating an expensive and reduced new department. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher Irby.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Irby II. I'm a rising 8th grader at River City Middle School and Richmond Public Schools. And I'm going to share our concerns about how the RPS School Board has rejected the professional advice of the RPS administration while setting unrealistic and arbitrary expression for the RPS leaders. At April 12th, RPS School Board meeting, RPS Superintendent Jason Cairns clearly stated that in the passing of this construction resolution, the board was making a mistake and estimated that building schools would delay construction of a new George Wolf school by 3 years, which the Wolf community did not deserve. He also explained that the assumption of procurement and construction management responsibilities could distract his administration from more urgent work to resume in-person learning and launch summer school. The board ignored his input. On July 19, 2021, the school board adopted a resolution directing the RPS administration to issue a new request for proposals for the design of George Wolf High School by August 31st, 2021, despite the fact that RPS does not have appropriate staff to undertake such work at this time, that the city of Richmond currently has an outstanding RFP for the design of George Wolf and the many other urgent tasks facing the RPS administration prior to August 31st. Mr. Cameron warned that something will fall through the cracks with his unrealistic directive. Again, by a 5-4 vote, this professional advice was ignored and the resolution was adopted. Additionally, the resolution was introduced, discussed, and voted on in one meeting without providing the opportunity for public comment.
Thank you. Teresa Kennedy?
Good morning. My name is Teresa Kennedy, and I'm a mother of 2 boys, both of whom are RPS students. And I will be discussing our concerns with the way that the RPS School Board has ignored community input. The Richmond Public School Board has also ignored the input of our other stakeholders and the broader community. This May, the Richmond City Mayor and City Council leadership sent the school board a letter proposing a new cooperation agreement to follow the construction of George Wythe to move forward on time, to allow the construction of George Wythe to move forward on time with existing resources and staff, while RPS worked on building its own internal capacity to handle a project of this scale. To date, the school board has not issued a response to the May letter from the City of Richmond, nor have they responded to an additional letter sent in June when the mayor explained he would like to work with the schools on procurement. Numerous community members submitted public comment at meetings in April, May, and June pertaining to the George Wythe matter, but no formal solicitation of the public views took place until the school board scheduled a special community meeting on July 13th, 2021 at George Wythe High School. At this meeting, approximately 36 community members, including students, parents, staff, and alumni of George Wythe High School, as well as numerous community leaders, spoke. Every single speaker spoke in favor of the school board reaching an agreement with the city to build a new George Wythe. Not one speaker supported the school board's actions. One student speaker complained during their comments that school board members appeared not to be listening to her comments, but were instead paying attention to their phone. One member got up and left the room, and another member left the stage during the same speaker's comments. The day following the meeting, the school board member who left the meeting posted on social media that she had been personally mistreated by the public comments and criticized a news story about the meeting as propaganda. Once again, community members wrote the school board public comments to be read at this past Monday, July 19th's regular business meeting. And once again, there was not one comment at Monday's meeting that supported the Schools Build Schools resolution from April 1st. Also at Monday's meeting, the school board then acted to move forward with planning a smaller George Wythe of just 1,600 students, as opposed to the 2,000 recommended by the administration. This generationally important decision was made without any public input whatsoever or any serious weighing of the impact and ripple effects of this decision. Community members agree with the RPS administration's assessment that strong student growth in the south side of Richmond, as well as the fact that some south side students are being bused now to high schools north of the James River, make planning for the larger school far more appropriate. In short, the school board moved in the opposite direction of public input without providing clearly documented rationale or soliciting meaningful public or professional input on the policy changes it enacted. And then our next reader, Jenny Agamo, isn't here. She was unable to make it in time.
Okay.
Can I submit her comments? Do you want me to
Sure.
read them too, or no? No.
Actually, I'm okay if you read them. I think
Okay.
that's fine. Thank you for the offer.
All right, pretend I'm Jenny Agamo. Good morning. My name is Jenny Agamo. I'm a mom of 4 girls, 2 of whom are class of 21 graduates from RPS and 2 more who are RPS students. I'm going to share our concerns about the ways the RPS school board has needlessly delayed the construction of the new George Wythe High School and how they have failed to prioritize attention to reopening. First, this is how we believe the RPS school board has needlessly delayed the construction of a new George Wythe High School. The sum result of the school board's actions has been a delay in the construction of the new George Wythe. The current George Wythe building is universally recognized as substandard and WITH is the lowest performing school in the city and among the lowest in the Commonwealth of Virginia as measured by on-time graduation rates, 50% in 2020. Over 90% of students at the school are Black and Latino. Community members believe the delay of a new school building is inconsistent with the priority of lifting academic achievement for all students and moving all schools to full accreditation as quickly as possible. In the July 13th public meeting, this is Jenny Agamo, who just arrived, community members provided testimony and physical evidence of the dilapidated and decrepit conditions at George Wythe currently. The decisions of the school board will extend, likely by years, the length of time RPS students must attend this expired facility. Our reading of RPS's MOU with the VDOE also suggests that many steps in the construction process, if handled directly by RPS, may require state review, leading to further delays and expenses in the construction process. Our research, is that?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
We're trying to handle the feedback on the call.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Our research has not yet yielded any recent examples of other school systems under an MOU with VDOE building new schools on their own. Next, this is how we believe the RPS school board has failed to prioritize attention to reopening. The decision to mandate that RPS administration create as quickly as possible a new construction division and hire the skilled procurement personnel required to oversee school construction also creates a massive distraction from the urgent work of helping Richmond schools reopen safely. In-person education in Richmond was extremely limited in 2021, and the vast majority of RPS students have been in virtual learning since March 2020. These students will need extra support, and the district needs a plan to help these students overcome learning loss as well as any additional non-academic needs like mental health support and trauma counseling so that the pandemic does not lead to permanent setbacks in academic achievement. Setbacks which would further delay the achievement of full accreditation for all Richmond public schools. We believe it is deeply inappropriate and irresponsible for the RPS school board to spend time and resources expanding the RPS administration's scope of responsibility when it has not demonstrated excellence in exercising its current responsibilities, and when many children are in urgent need of additional support right now. As noted above, the July 19th resolution places extraordinary pressure on the superintendent at a time when full attention should be executing the many moving parts involved in reopening a system of 25,000 students during a pandemic that is still ongoing. And then just note that also they failed to approve the federal stimulus dollars.
That's fine. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Agamo, and thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Williams, please. Lakeisha Williams.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lakeisha Williams, and I am a teacher and a parent of 4 children of RPS. I have been a teacher for 13 years. I'm going to share our request with you of the Board of Education. We have deeply concerns and setbacks of actions which we believe are very harmful to students of Richmond Public Schools in specifics, harmful of the current and future students of George Wythe. We write to alert the Board of Education of these concerns and request that you examine these matters thoroughly. As the authority ultimately responsible for the Richmond Public Education and the Commonwealth of Virginia, specifically, we ask that you mandate by the terms of the 2017 MOU. With Richmond Public Schools, DOE, and the staff review will consider denying approval of any expenses incurred to RPS using state or federal dollars as a construction process to oppose the investment of the instructional needs. We also ask that the decision-making process which have led to the current RPS board policies be examined on governance perspectives that has been presented. One member of the RPS board has gone so far to assert that the Richmond Public Schools are wholly separate from the city of Richmond, even though the city and the city taxpayers fund over half of the school's budget. Even though the school board is legally mandated to respond to the requirements of the Commonwealth of Virginia, we are concerned that this is a mistaken view that school boards will wholly anonymous unit will impede on the process enrichment, including common sense, collaboration, and resources sharing with the city, and that the effort will take control over everything related to schools, with the school board losing their prime focus of the objective and responsibility of improving the academic process and outcomes of our Richmond children. Finally, we ask that the Board of Education review the impact of RPS administration, staff, and leadership, time being devoted to the issue instead of planning for the 2021-2022 school year, in identifying and meeting the needs of children returning to in-person learning due to the pandemic. We do not mistake this request lightly at all. We value the leadership of our school board, but we believe the school board must follow the governance procedures and that Richmond is specific obligations to focus with the intentions on improving academic performance that resent the actions of Richmond Public School Board that do not appear to respect the intent focus of our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles Willis.
Congratulations, Uncle Dan. That's an inside joke, y'all. Don't worry about that. That's an inside joke. And congratulations, Madam Vice President, as well as President and board members. Thank you so much. I do apologize. I do not have a written statement. I shared with one of your staff members that going forward, I would make sure that I would have a written statement. But I do want to share that even if I did have a written statement, I think at this point it needs to come directly from the heart. One of the things that I've watched each and every one of you all since you've been sitting here listening to the comments about the state of Richmond Public Schools, and that's what I come to this morning to share with you. I have not seen you turn away from our comments. I have not seen you drink anything. I have not seen you on your phones. I have not seen you get up and go to the restroom, and that's because I believe that all of you all value the opportunity that we as citizens and parents and children have come this far because of the concerns we have for Richmond Public Schools. You've heard a lot of comments about George Wythe, and I share with you that our children must be first, not power and not politics. And there are board members, and I'm gonna call them out specifically who they are, because there are comments that have been mentioned, if you've seen in the media, about the school board. But I share with you today, it is not the school board as a whole. These 5 individuals have positioned themselves to pretty much present themselves in a way that they have pretty much taken over the operations and the directions of the school board and have just blatantly ignored the concerns of the community. These 5 board members is none other than the Vice Chair, Mr. Jonathan Young, Ms. Kenya Gibson, Ms. Stephanie Rizzi, Ms. Mariah White, and Dr. Chandra Harris Muhammad. We have spoke with them individually. I've reached out to some of them individually and said, how can we make this work? How can we get this done? And it's not only about the faith of George Wythe High School, but also Woodville and also the technical center that we talked about. And then it goes even further, because if you do this to one, you'll do it to all. So the faith of John Marshall that is soon to be rebuilt, and Armstrong, which is in the building of John F. Kennedy. All of those things they matter to us. But what's most important to me, I want to share with you all, and we are at the mercy of the board. There are some folks that figured if they get 5 votes, they don't have to say nothing. They don't have to do nothing, and they can do what they want to do. But we believe that there's a higher power, and that higher power, that higher authority sits with this body right today. So we are asking you all that you all would come together in some form or fashion and hold Richmond Public Schools accountable to us, the citizens, the parents, the voters. I can tell you that they sit and listen just like you all are doing now. But I believe strongly in my heart that you all are going to go into a closed session or a meeting, and you're going to discuss what we are talking about now. And you're going to come back to us and say, we either want to hear more, we're going to come out of these seats and go into the community. We want to hear more from the community. Board members, we don't want to hear from you. We want to hear from the community. We have 5 board members that say, we don't want to hear from you. We're listening, but we don't want to hear from you. And then the young folks, I say in the closing of this, our young teenagers today have words that they have their own language. One of them is, you don't feel me. And they don't mean touch them. Don't put your hands on them. That means you don't understand what they're going through in their hearts. Another one they say is, you in the way. And when a young teenager tell you you're in the way, that means you're doing something that is out of norm, and they want you out of the way. And they normally do things to get you out of the way. Unfortunately, a lot of that you've seen that comes from our young homicides. I close with this. The other is, you're doing too much. Our Richmond Public 5 board members are doing too much. And that too much is too much for us, the citizens, and we need them to listen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you all for being here. Is there anybody else, although we did take the list, is there anybody else who'd like to address the board for me? Please come on forward, and if it's okay, state your name and any affiliation you have.
I'm sorry, I emailed late yesterday evening.
That's okay. No, we do this routinely. I'm sorry you didn't make the list, but we're happy to have you.
My name is LaBarbara Jones. I'm a George Wolf alumni. I graduated in '99. I am a parent of a former student. I have a middle school student who is slated to go to George Wolf. I work at George Wolf as the attendance person, and I live in the community. They walk past my house all the time, say that's the attendance lady house. So I've watched this school over an amount of years. It was slated to be rebuilt when I was in school, 1997. Another school, which is 20 years younger than George Wolf, 15 to 20 years younger, had a problem in the gym. Not only did they fix it, they knocked down the whole school and rebuilt it because they were in a middle-class neighborhood. Brown students started going to that school. They rezoned it and put those brown students in George Wolf in a failing school. This is not becoming just an issue of safety in the building. This is a social justice issue. This is a human rights issue. When you have mouse feces on the student's desk every day, mice sitting it's infested. You can hear them as you sit in your office going across the ceiling. You cannot get rid of them because it is poop and feces in the ceiling. So even if you kill the ones that's there, the scent brings more in. We have had several janitors get cancer. We have had several teachers die. They requested to leave that school for years because they said they had not been sick in any other school till they came to George Wolf. And we lost a loyal teacher because they finally moved her to Huguenot, but it was already too late. We have students that need help, but you cannot focus on teaching them or getting them to come to school if their school looks like where they come from. Because school is supposed to be a safe haven. So if you have kids coming from lower income housing where they are shooting and killing, where it is dirty, where it's unclean, and then they come in the building and see the same thing, how can we do anything? How can we stand there and say, it's okay? It's not okay. I have seen it go on for decades and decades. This is becoming more than just, we need a new building. We need a new mindset. We need empathy. We need people who don't have backhand agendas. We need people with less pride on the school board. We need people with less egos. We need people who actually care about someone other than their career future. It is important and imperative. The school will not make it to 2027. They want to start building in 2025, it will not make it. If George Wolf, if you say you are only as great as your weakest link, and if George Wolf is the weakest link, and it has mold, rats, roaches, filth, cracks in the building, leaks in the ceiling, then what does that say about Virginia, VDOE? What does that say about RPS? What does that say about us? We will never meet the standards given to us for SOLs. We will never meet the standards given to us for VEOE. Because when I was in school, it was struggling, but at least it was somewhat of a safe haven, and we thought it was going to get better. Now there is nothing in foresight for us. Every time they're supposed to rebuild, they were supposed to rebuild in 2018, they put us on the back burner, they rezone and put more kids in poverty into that school. This is not just for a building. This is for everything. This is a risk that you have to take to help us. We are begging you. I cannot watch this anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak, even though they didn't get on the sign-up list? If not, I mean, although we typically don't comment, I will say this. There are a number of us on this board who, live and work in this area and are clearly very familiar, certainly with the public reporting, with what's going on. And, I will tell you how much I appreciate the clarity of your presentation, as well as the organization of the presentation and the fact that you all took the time to be here today. I think, as at least one of the speakers noted, our control of local matters is, peculiarly limited, right? I mean, the Commonwealth setup is that locals do control their, the divisions. That being said, I think the board will talk a little bit at some point about the issues, because Richmond is, as also pointed out by one of the speakers, a jurisdiction under MOU. And, we do have, certain rights to look, which is not the same as saying we have governance rights. I don't want to mislead anybody or to suggest we have the ability to have governance rights. We don't, but we do have certain things that we're entitled to do under the MOU. And there will be some conversations about what we think would be appropriate. So I don't want you to think that we can snap our fingers and change things, because we can't. On the other hand, I don't want you to walk away thinking we didn't listen to you, because we did. And, I hope that's satisfactory to all of you. And again, thank you for taking the time to be here. And, seriously, thank you for being so well organized about it, and not just being duplicative speaker after speaker. It was a very well done presentation. So thank you all. Now, you are welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, or if you want to take this time to sort of, exit, you're welcome, and don't have to feel rude about doing that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, move on to the consent agenda, items A through D. Is there anybody who wants to pull any item from the consent agenda, or is there a motion to approve the agenda as drafted?
Motion to approve the agenda as drafted.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 I was waiting for it, Dr. Davis Vaught, so that's good. Thank you. All right, item E, final review for consent to the establishment of a joint operated school, Region 7 Virtual Academy. Mr. Bowling.
Good morning, President Gecker, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Lane, members of the board. Item E provides for final review the formal request for consent to establish, a joint operated school in Virginia as required by 22.1-26 of the Code of Virginia. This section of the code requires the Board of Education's consent when two or more school boards wish to establish a joint or regional school or program. Since first review, 4 additional schools have, in Superintendent's Region 7, have joined the original 13 school division partners to create the Region 7 Virtual Academy that is seeking the consent to establish the joint operated program today. The Superintendent of Public Construction recommends that the board provide consent to establish the Region 7 Virtual Academy as the joint operated program. The Academy is represented on the phone by Dr. Keith Perigin, Superintendent of Bristol City Public Schools, Dr. Robert Graham, Superintendent of Radford City Public Schools, and Ms. Caitlin Cosme, Executive Director of the Region 7 Virtual Academy, and are available to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? We've heard the presentations before. I think we got some supplemental materials in the interim. If not, gentlemen, thank you for being on the phone with us, or more than gentlemen, and lady perhaps, for being on the phone with us. However, I don't see any questions from the board. Is there a motion to approve this?
So moved, President Gecker.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Duran. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Waiting for Dr. Davis-Vaught.
This is
Okay.
an item, President Gecker, in which I must recuse.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Item F, final review of revisions to model guidance for positive and preventative code of student conduct policy and alternatives to suspension. Dr. Hollins? Or perhaps not. All right, we'll move on to item G, final review of revised regulation for licensed child daycare centers, transferring from the Board of Social Services to the Board of Education. Ms. Conway. It's okay. No big deal.
Good morning, President Gecker, Vice President Wilson, members of the board. This is our last step in moving over. You've heard me say that before, but I promise, unless we uncover something else, but this is our last step in moving all of the regulations over as is. And as you'll remember, one of the commitments we made when we, in partnership with the General Assembly, established the unification legislation is that we would move everything over as is, create the Early Childhood Advisory Committee, and then revisit licensing and subsidy regulations. This is one piece that was literally in motion when you all approved the as-is move over a few months ago. So it's a small piece of regulation that dates back, this work started in 2016 at the Department of Social Services. It went through full review under the Board of Social Services, full public comment, and then was finally approved just after we moved over the body of regulations. So what you're doing today is just agreeing to move over this last piece. It pertains to child day centers, and it is just bringing them in alignment with the federal reauthorization, which again passed in 2015. So things like making sure it's clear that they all have to have certain expectations around training and orientation. One of the things that the federal government requires now is the establishment of group size. So you have ratios in terms of teacher-child ratios, and then it says what's the maximum number you can have in any classroom or space. So again, just a set of things that Virginia put into effect as a result of the federal law, and this is the last piece. That the reason we didn't bring to you 3 months ago is because it was still going through the full public comment over at the Board of Social Services.
Okay, thank you. I still think of you as Chief Readiness Officer, by the way. I'm not going to get used to the new title, but so soon. All right, any questions for Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Education Conway? Board's mighty quiet this month.
Well, we will take this because the as-is work is much easier than the to-come work, so.
Okay, is there a motion then to adopt item G?
So moved, President Gecker.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson. No discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is Dr. Hollins here yet? Not yet. Okay. Item I. First review of proposed revisions to the guidelines for locally awarded verified credits to allow for the use of performance assessments to verify credits in history and social science. Ms. Loving Ryder and Mr. Bowling.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
Item I outlines proposed revisions to the standards of accreditation guidance, the standards of accreditation or SOA guidance document pertaining to awarding locally verified credits. The revisions allow for the use of performance assessments to verify credits in history and social science and address the language in the 2020 and 2021 General Assembly's Appropriation Act that adds, quote, successful completion of assessments that include state-developed performance tasks scored locally in accordance with board guidelines using state-developed rubrics, end quote, as an option for earning verified credit in history and social science. These amendments to the SOA guidance document will provide guidance for local school divisions that exercise the option of using state-developed performance tasks in conjunction with other local assessments to determine if a student has earned locally awarded verified credit in history and social science. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Shelley Loving-Ryder to walk you through the proposed revisions.
Good morning, Mr. Gecker, President, members of the board, and Dr. Lane. As Michael mentioned, what we're bringing you today is revisions to the guidelines for awarding locally awarded verified credits. And these revisions are in response to the Appropriations Act language, as Michael noted, that does provide the opportunity for the award of verified credits by the use of performance assessments in history. What we're bringing you today is really patterned after the guidelines you provided to school divisions during the pandemic in the emergency guidelines for the use of performance assessments for a locally awarded verified credit. The guidelines themselves are in attachment B. That's the strike through and underline version, and then there's a clean version in attachment C. I'm going to go over the version in attachment B so that you can see the changes. But before we do that, I wanted to acknowledge the wealth of information that is included in attachment A. This details all of the support that the department has provided to school divisions since 2015 in the use of performance assessments in the area of history. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Christania Brown, the coordinator of history in the Department of Learning. She's in the audience today, and also the work of Holly Cook, who's the performance assessment coordinator in the Division of Student Assessment. There are many other people who've been involved in this process, but Christania and Holly have really led the work. So we wanted to acknowledge their efforts in shepherding this through the work with school divisions. So I'll turn now to attachment B. This is the revisions to the guidelines for locally awarded verified credit. These guidelines are included in a larger document called the SOA guidance document. This fairly extensive document really includes all of the guidelines that deal with the standards of accrediting schools. So in attachment B, if you want to follow along, the changes really begin on page 2. You know that we've had guidelines for awarding locally awarded verified credit for some time. And what we have done in this change is to add an option 2. And this really is consistent with the emergency guidelines that you approved during the pandemic. So option 2 is only applicable to history, and it states that to get a locally awarded verified credit in history, the student must pass the course and then demonstrate mastery of the content of that course through evidence. And that evidence must include performance tasks that have been developed by the state, so state-developed performance tasks. Additionally, the student responses to those tasks must be scored using the state-developed rubric. So state-developed task, state-developed rubrics. And then finally, the revision states that any locally awarded verified credit awarded under this option would not count towards the cap that is typically in place for locally awarded verified credits. As you all are well aware, under the provisions of the locally awarded verified credit statement in the SOA, school divisions must develop a process for reviewing the evidence when this occurs. And The appeals process for option 1 remains the same, but for option 2, again, there would be a local panel convened. It would have to be at least 3 educators who would review the evidence. And there could be a different panel for each school or one for the division overall. And it is important to note that the student's teacher of record cannot sit on that particular panel. The local review panel would review the evidence. The evidence would have to contain at least 3 of the 4 performance tasks that are available for that history course. Each of the history courses are divided into 4 eras, and there's a task for each era. So 3 of those 4 tasks must be evident in the evidence. And then additionally, there would be other local assessments that would cover the other content. So a collection of evidence that really would cover all of the content, but that must include 3 of the 4 available performance tasks. And then as is the case with the current option 1, the panel would either recommend awarding the verified credit or recommend additional evidence or deny the request. There is also additional guidelines included in this document about how the performance task would be used. At the bottom of page 3, it talks about the state-developed tasks. We have currently tasks in place for Virginia and U.S. history that have been developed in collaboration with the field and experts in the area. Staff at the department are currently working on tasks for the other history courses, World History 1, World History 2, and World Geography, and that work is going on this summer. There's also a statement that the standards of learning for the course must be covered either through the performance task or through other evidence. And then again, a statement that reiterates that the task must be state developed. This is to comply with the requirement in the appropriations language that the task used must be state developed and that the state developed rubric must be used. There's also a statement at the bottom that provides guidance about scoring. It makes it clear that best practice is the student's teacher would not participate in the scoring, but that there is an option that for 2 of the 3 tasks used, the teacher of record could be a scorer. On page 5, there's a requirement for an annual notification if a school division wishes to pursue this option, and then they would have to provide a plan. And then lastly, we would intend to continue our practice of using desk reviews in this process. As Michael and I shared with you last month when we were talking about the local alternative assessments for the lower grade history and writing, we talked about the value of those desk reviews. It really is a way of seeing what school divisions are doing, a way to identify best practices that we can share, and also a way in which we can identify areas where additional support might be needed. Mr. Gecker, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, recommends that you accept this revision to the SOA guidance document on first review, and Michael and I would be happy to answer any questions, and Christania and Holly are our backup if there are questions that we can't answer.
Okay, so we have the complete A team here with us. Huh? Thank you. Any questions by board members? Yeah, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Ms. Loving-Rider and Mr. Boland. Thank you very much. So just one quick question. Remind us about the desk review process to ensure that we have, in general, that we have a wide perspective of what's going on across the Commonwealth as opposed to individual divisions.
So typically we take a sample, and so we usually use 24 school divisions, 3 from each region, and we attempt to select rural, urban, suburban, and so on. And then typically there would be a different group the following year. Sometimes, as we shared last month, we do a division 2 years in a row to get sort of a sense of progress over time. And if we have more staff, we could do more, but right now it's 24 divisions.
Okay. Any other questions? Dr. Duran?
No question. Just want to comment and thank you all for the work that you've done in this area. I hope that we will be able to gather the data and continue to tell our story so that eventually we can go beyond just history, social science to other areas where I do believe that local, and we've talked about it too in some of our discussions, and formerly on the SOL Innovation Committee, we had a lot of discussions around the power behind performance-based assessments. And so I would just want to encourage, now that we are moving in this way in the area of history and social science, how do we capture, and maybe some comments from how we might capture what this is and the data and how it's being used in a meaningful way, even following up on what Dr. Wilson just said, how we're using the reviews in that manner to be able to show that this actually is going to have a positive impact from teachers and students, and how do we even involve their voice in this in the qualitative side of what we're looking at, as well as quantitatively seeing what we're doing. So I would, any comment on that, but really just want to thank you for your work and really encourage us to move forward as best we can in the area of performance-based assessments. And a lot of that is going to be educating our General Assembly members to understand this as well in a way how it's meaningful. I think that over time we've looked at assessments, and we've known that when we've done when we try to quantify an assessment through a multiple choice or some of our SOLs, going way back, I remember the discussions about how that was so important to get the multiple choice and have that very clear and not have any sense of subjectivity. And people were afraid of just looking at performance-based assessments because of the subjectivity that might be involved. And that was a whole pushback, if you might remember, on the SOL Innovation Committee, those conversations we had. But this is an opportunity now for us to show that, yes, assessment can still be done in this way, and actually can be done in a very powerful way to inform instruction regularly and more differentiated for students, and also meaningful for students. Because what I have seen for students who've engaged with performance assessments, they really, really are bought into and get excited about their learning and are proud to showcase what they have accomplished and what they've learned and what they've mastered in that area. So isn't that what we want it to be all about, right? Our students getting excited about their learning. Not as excited about taking an SOL assessment, but I just want to encourage us to do that. And we'll love any comments you have on what you might be thinking about how we can use this data to help us on that charge. And you know very well, as you were part of the SOL Innovation Committee conversation so many years ago, but let's not let that work die with this. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts. I think one of the values of our current situation with history is that we do have these state-developed tasks. So there's some commonality in what a student in Bristol and a student in Accomack would respond to. There's also the state-developed rubrics. So there's some commonality in the way in which the students' work would be scored. And one thing I didn't mention is there's ongoing work to create anchor samples that go with those rubrics. And Dr. Wilson, I know, is very familiar with that process from her work with the writing assessment over time. But it really is those anchor papers that help to define what is expected in the rubric. I know that sometimes the desk reviews seem like they are punitive or accountability driven, but it really is those desk reviews that has helped us to move forward with this project. We request documents from the school divisions who are selected, but staff also do extensive interviews with each of the selected divisions. And then they take that information and create webinars that are then shared with all school divisions. So it's a way of identifying, what works and sharing it, but it's also a way to help us move forward. I think department staff, for the most part, are very committed to a continuous improvement model, and this is a way to help us continue to move. Writing was the first area we did this with. We certainly learned a lot from writing, but history is very different. While we focus on the history skills, there's also content in history that must be covered. And Kristania is very adamant that one of the things in the rubric is accuracy of content. So, when we move to history, it really is that balance between the history skills where we want students to understand, different sources and the need to use evidence to support their arguments, but there's also making sure that they have that accuracy of content. So, Dr. Duran, I think that we have learned a lot, and I think, we're trying to move forward with using that content as we move forward. And Michael, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Thank you.
Dr.
Dr. Lane, do you have any thoughts on that? I know you also, I think you came to the very last SL Innovation Committee that we had, and you talked about your vision in some of this area. So I would love any of your thoughts around how this could help us in that path that we're in the journey we're on.
Certainly, one of the things that I've heard pretty frequently is that we need to show that we've built the capacity before there will even be discussions at the GA about any expansion. And to be honest, when we look at some of the legislation that was passed this year, we saw some movement in a positive direction on authentic assessment, and then we saw some increasing of more traditional assessment. And so I think that this project, with your approval, the next time you meet on this, is essential to us being able to make the case that our school divisions are ready. And I think that when we do that, it opens a whole new world of possibilities. I actually think that performance assessment isn't the only way to go either, though. Shelley and I have talked at length about potentially some combination assessments. Could you fuse the reading and writing assessments together? Could you fuse some reading, writing, and history and social sciences together? And so it may not be just this, but I think this opens the door to new exploration.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Dr. Mann.
Yeah, it's very interesting conversation. Just really curious, just nationally, are there other states that are using performance-based strategies to complement their assessment endeavors? Are we on the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, the frontier? It's a very, very interesting conversation.
There are other states across the country who are using performance assessments. New Hampshire is probably the one you hear the most about. So there are other states. I'm not aware of other states that are using performance assessments in history to the extent we're trying to, but that's certainly something we can look into and get back to you.
An important piece of context there is, because history is not mandated by the federal government, every state does not assess in history. And so it's one of the reasons that we think that this is an area for us to begin innovating, because if we want to get into the other subject areas, not only do we have to talk with the General Assembly about some flexibility, we'd also have to talk with the federal government.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Ms. Halton.
If I may, I was going to raise a matter just wanted to comment on in our discussion of current issues, but I'm going to stick it in here because I think it's relevant, and I'd love to have Kristania be in the audience. First, thank you for your wonderful work. In addition to what we've been talking about, the work to incorporate I've read your report on African American history education and the work you've done to incorporate the recommendations from the Governor's Commission on African American history, on history education, is really important. And I know it's challenging, and you're wrestling with a lot of competing interests, but the importance of telling our story accurately and recognizing that we haven't told it accurately in the past and that now we need to is so important. And in that vein, I just want to raise up for you and for everybody a remarkable man who passed away a few weeks ago, Bill Robertson, who was my father's advisor in his governor's office back in 1970, and has actually written a memoir just before, finished his memoir just before he passed, and it will be coming out from UVA Press later this year or early next year, and I'm going to make sure you get an advance copy as soon as possible. But when my dad was elected governor in 1969, he announced in his inaugural address in January of 1970 that he wanted to initiate an aristocracy of ability regardless of race, color, or creed. And that seems so sort of normal now, but in 1970, that was the end of the age of defiance, of massive resistance in a symbolic way, at least. And part of what he promised was that he was going to integrate state government. And he started by naming Bill Robertson to his leadership team. Bill was a principal in a Roanoke City public school, and had done great work there and with in various community endeavors. And Dad asked him to come serve as the first African American in a leadership role in state government, and charged him, among other things, with helping integrate state government. He, in this memoir, tells some of those amazing stories, including, integrating the state police. The first African American members on the state police were there because of Bill Robertson's doggedness in recruiting candidates and convincing them to be willing to apply, shepherding them through passing all the qualifying exams, and then, despite passing through all the qualifying exams, having to, shall we say, encourage a reluctant bureaucracy to then take advantage of their talents, and then proceeding to do that in every other state agency. He said in his memoir, he says, they had never seen anyone like me in state government, so he became something of a celebrity. He was speaking both within his state government role and beyond, publicly, in all kinds of ways. And I won't go on, but went on to serve in the Peace Corps. He was passionate about his work with the JCs, supporting camps for students with disabilities throughout his life, remained a family friend throughout his life. And I raise his story up as an example of one of the many that we need to raise up in all kinds of ways as we rethink the story of our past. So, thank you.
No question.
No, that was all comment. The question
comment.
is just, how quickly can I get you that memoir, and I'll follow up separately on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. The board is happy to accept this on first review.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go back now to item F. Final review of revisions to model guidance for positive and preventative code of student conduct policy and alternatives to suspension. Dr. Hollins.
Good morning. I apologize profusely for my delay. I find it ironic that I managed to be on time for a year and a half of distance meetings and in another location, but 2 floors away, I was tardy. My deepest
The vote was
apologies.
actually to do this at 2:00 this afternoon, by the way, just so you know, to defer.
I would be here irregardless. So thank you so much for your flexibility. And good morning, President Gecker, Vice President Wilson. Congratulations,
Thank you.
board members, and Dr. Lane. I'm Dr. Sam Hollins, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning for the final review of updates to our model guidance for positive and preventative code of conduct student policy and alternatives to suspension. If you will recall, we initially reviewed this item at your June meeting, and I'm pleased to report that we've taken the time to ensure that there's no additional stakeholder feedback or input, given the robustness of our initial work with groups on some of these updates, which you remember are really due to legislation that's happened over the past 2 General Assembly sessions. This item has detailed information within the table to link each of those legislative actions with the updates that we provided in the guide. And also, while there have been no substantive edits to the document, we did seek to clarify some language on page 11 that maintained the link to research-based practice, as well as ensuring that the message was really clear. So I do want to bring your attention to that clarification. And as always, I'm happy to answer any additional questions or concerns, and would like to share with you that the superintendent's recommendation is for the board to approve the revisions to the model guidance today. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Dr. Duran.
So there, if I heard you correctly, there was no recent public comment and feedback, correct? Is that what you said?
Correct, Dr. John. There were no additional stakeholder feedback. The board has received none, and we also did a circle around with some of our initial stakeholders, and folks felt comfortable and felt like they were fully informed regarding the changes and are anxious to begin it in advance of the school year.
Prior public comment, was there any feedback that was received that was not incorporated in here? Can you remind us of that?
No, there was not. All of the current changes also reflect all of the information. If you'll see at the bottom of the table, there are some specific instances, particularly with some of our professional development groups that were incorporated into the additions as well. So we were able to take those comments and to fold them into the revisions, particularly as many of them address some of the specific items from legislation.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. And thank you for your work on this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you all for taking the time to review. I know it's quite a hefty read, but this is a really valuable document for our schools as they really start to pivot to positive school discipline. And I'm sure you're aware, given the presentation by Dr. Sale yesterday, that this is a really great partnership with our updated data collection measures. So we, particularly my Office of Student Services, are very excited for the implementation timeline of this work.
Great. Any other questions, Ms. Holton?
Thank you for all that great work. And I really think the final document's going to be incredibly helpful to the divisions. I had one spot, and I'm looking for it, but you highlighted, you reminded us in your intro notes, in the written notes, that we had some discussion about page 11, language on page 11 that I'm now trying to get back to.
And Secretary Holden, I'm happy to read that aloud or to help you find that if it's.
Yeah, it might well be helpful to read it aloud just for the sake of everybody else, and I think I have found it.
Absolutely. So it's on page 11. It's actually the second paragraph. And you'll notice that the content within this paragraph really helps to juxtapose some of the differing social obligations and some of the research we've learned over the last few years, in particular focus on student populations who are coming into the academic and educational environment, and where there may be some dissonance between the expectations culturally and within what we've really seen in the past as a formal educational environment. So this content specifically speaks to the flexibility and approach of our educators and administrators of being responsive to children's cultural background and students, and being able to engage in positive communication and outcomes as a result of any discipline that might occur within the school setting.
So if I may, the specific language, and I did have a little potential tweak to it. I understand what you're trying to get at here, but if we're not careful, we could put in language that'll come, that we would, it's hard to get it right, I guess is my point. So the current language says that school divisions should recognize the need for addressing the changing demographics of the student population. No argument there. Students from diverse backgrounds are becoming the majority demographic group in U.S. public schools. Got it. This is the sentence that I raise up for consideration. For many students, the rich knowledge set, values, relational styles, and behavioral expectations cultivated and adapted at home under one set of socialization beliefs and practices often do not match up well with those in educational settings. So I get what you're trying to get at, but it just makes me a little uncomfortable. And I wonder, I mean, this maybe is just a very minor tweak. I mean, a more major tweak would be maybe to think about whether, is this language really working for us altogether, but do we want to just jettison it? But my minor tweak would be, instead of saying often do not match up well, to just say may not match up well. Because I don't actually have a statistical survey that tells me when folks' home expectations match up with school socialization. I don't want to presume that they don't match up, and that often, to me, suggests a presumption that in many cases they don't match up. So as I say, the minor tweak would be just often do not, change that to may not.
I'm happy to make that edit. I've actually captured it here. I'll make sure it's reflected with Emily. And I think it's also important to note that this is actually referring specifically to a research-based citation that we use to support that statement. So I think that clarification gives the flexibility while also ensuring that folks have a follow-up source to dig into a little bit deeper, which focuses on African-American students in particular. So I really appreciate that feedback.
Okay, anybody else? If not, thank you, Dr. Hollins. Is there a motion to approve this with the change suggested by Ms. Holton?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Mann. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Dr. Davis-Vaught. That passes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are, I notice it, welcome, Mr. Duval. We're going to do a quick 5-minute, really only 5-minute break, and then we will be back for item J. Thank you. Dr. Davis Vaught, are you still with us? One on the phone, Barry. That's
Okay. Okay.
One more time.
Yeah. Dr. Davis Vaught, are you with us still on the phone?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. We are going to get going then. We are delighted today to be joined by Barry Duval, old friend and president and CEO of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Deetra Trent, also old friend, former Secretary of Education and co-chair of the Workforce and Education Blueprint Executive Committee, and Eric Ryson, who I actually just met today. So sorry, I can't really have that same appellation. Vice President of Public Policy and Research at the Virginia Chamber. We are really delighted that y'all took the time to be with us. We know how busy you are. And Barry, I'm going to turn the floor to you. And, the board is really interested in hearing about this important topic. So thanks again.
Thank you, Chairman Gecker, and to the distinguished panel. Thank you for your public service. Dr. Lane, thanks for your public service. I think as I was walking in here today, I was thinking about what we all as an audience have in common. And we have in common the interest of improving the next generation of Virginians. We have in common a commitment to innovation to do that. And I think we have in common a real commitment to public service. I was visiting just a minute with Dr. Wilson and was reflecting on my time as a mayor of Newport News from 1990 to 96, where we actually started the Achievable Dream program, which has become a national model for innovation and changing the lives of individuals, one student at a time. And I told Dr. Wilson that the idea for Achievable Dream did not come from educators, and the idea did not come from a politician. The idea came from the business community. And I have found in my career, the business community's role goes far beyond employing people and far beyond simply producing a product or service. But the business community's role, rightfully, is to invest in the community and invest in the state in which it's located. So the years I spent in local government and then 4 years as Secretary of Commerce and Trade in Virginia helped me understand the power and the influence for good that the business community can have in the Commonwealth. The last 11 years I've been running the State Chamber of Commerce, and we have put forward 2 blueprints for Virginia closely tied to improving our business climate. And we've had a lot of survey work done over the years and worked very closely with all the stakeholders from the business community to the education community to healthcare community and other important areas. Every 4 years in Virginia, we have the wisdom or challenge of electing a new governor. Every 4 years in Virginia, we don't get an opportunity to reward the existing governor and give that person a second term. The wisdom of our those who constructed our Constitution is to have a new governor every 48 months. And I don't know about your organization, but it's challenging to think about having a new executive in your organization every 48 months. It's challenging for the organization because you begin to set your timeline for planning around 48-month horizons. I know that from personal experience, having been in a cabinet position for 48 months. But the business community really should think and does think longer term than 48 months. And as I studied best practices around the country, I learned that the most effective way for the business community to make its voice heard is to do so in a nonpartisan way, to endorse ideas and not candidates, and to have a longer term horizon on issues of competitiveness and present those as a set of ideas. So that's where we came up with the original blueprint, presented our first one to Terry McAuliffe after his election, our second one to current Governor Ralph Northam, and then we hope to present our third blueprint to the newly elected governor December 3rd. We want you to be part of that blueprint process. We're interested in meeting with all the stakeholders. I've got about a 15-minute presentation that Dr. Trent's going to help me, and she will share some of the results of polling we've done already this year. We've had over 4,000 businesses participate in our polling around the state. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, that we can have a dialogue on issues as well. So if you allow me to go through this PowerPoint, I think, is it Kevin that's going to be advancing these?
Yes.
We'll go to the next slide, and he'll advance these for me. So just as a reminder for you, the State Chamber has a vision to be the voice of Virginia business. You may know that we have a goal to be an influential advocacy organization. We are a C6. We do advocate for ideas, and we do lobby the General Assembly. The next slide will show you that our mission is to be nonpartisan. Again, we don't endorse candidates. We endorse ideas, but we are active in the regulatory arena and the legislative arena. And we want it to be a force for good for economic growth in Virginia. The next slide will show you a slide of Virginia, and every dot represents 25 members. And when I came, we had about 1,000 members. The next slide will show you how we've grown in membership over the last decade. And we're now the largest business organization in Virginia with over 27,000 members, representing about 1.1 million employees through the employer base. And that's about 25% of workers in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Every region is recognized. And we have a network of about 100 local chambers in Virginia, but about 90 of those local chambers have an alliance membership with the state chamber. So I'm here today to represent the state chamber and to be the voice of business and tell you about our blueprint process. The next slide will tell you, if someone asks me in an elevator, what's the goal of the chamber? Simply stated, it's to be the best state for business, to make sure our reputation is in fact recognized as the best state for business. I will show you a couple of successes that we've had. You've probably seen these. The next couple of slides, Kevin, we'll go through these quickly. Last week, we were announced for the first time in the rankings. Any state has repeated as the top state for business. CNBC came out with this last year, and we're very proud of this. We can talk more about it later. A couple of other rankings, if we'll go through these quickly, Kevin. Wallet Hub ranked as #1 best schools in the South. Best state for higher education, #2. Another ranking is business facilities. It comes out again actually this week. A new ranking. I think we're going to do very well in this. But we're #1 in cybersecurity, mostly because of our education and leadership in education. And I wanted to point that out. Our business ranking is high as well. Next slide will show you the innovation that is now being ranked by Wallet Hub. We're in the top 5 there. Next slide will show you the best state for military retirees. I told Dan earlier I'm speaking this afternoon to all the base commanders. I'm very proud of this slide. They have an annual gathering of all the military bases and their commanders, and so we're very proud of this. Virginia has about 20,000 military veterans that rotate out of the military every year, and about 10,000 stay in Virginia. We want that to improve, and we're working with the Department of Veteran Services in a partnership to improve that. And that number continues to go up. But the military, active duty, and their families and their spouses is a big part of our blueprint process. Next slide. We're beginning, as we should have been for a while, to lean in on equity and equality. And I want to mention that there's now rankings coming out around this. Even with the best state for business or the top 10, we were 7th last year. We were 5th in this area, and we can talk more about this later, but it is an area that now rankings are beginning to take into consideration. Next slide. A ranking that is not at all quantitative, but purely subjective, and that is the Chief Executive Magazine does a survey across the country of chief executives, and they said, just based on your impression right now, what's the best state for business? We were 16th. We came in this year at 13th. I think we should be a top 10 state. And that has more to do with the fact that Virginia, while we have done a lot of marketing for Virginia's for lovers and history, mountains and beaches, back in 2009, it was a tough time for governors back then, we stopped marketing Virginia for business. So we don't run commercials like New York and Minnesota and Michigan. We don't have outside marketing, advertising. So this ranking will go up, I think, in the future, but we really do need some marketing dollars for the Commonwealth to compete on this ranking. Next slide. Just a few slides to talk about technology, and Virginia has become Data Center Alley. If you haven't heard that, you will. Yesterday, I Zoomed with 340 people in Northern Virginia with the Go Virginia region, and a lot of Northern Virginia, but throughout the Commonwealth, we have become the hub of the data center alley. And it's because of our connectedness and our workforce and business climate. The next slide will simply show you the fact that our tech ecosystem is exploding here. And again, workforce is the driver for this. And we've been very fortunate to have a significant tech ecosystem. Next slide, I think, just indicates the importance of logistics. And logistics, because of our mid-Atlantic location, has become a big economic driver for us. All of this requires a specific level of workforce training, not necessarily four-year degrees. But this is an area that is in desperate need of more certifications and more training in this area. Next slide. So why Blueprint Virginia? I've alluded to this. I think the business community should have its fingerprints on a long-term planning document. We try to think 4 or 5 years in advance, but 10 years is a reasonable time to set some target goals. The next slide will show you, I think, a photo of our first blueprint being presented to Terry McCullough right after his election in 2013, and worked with him on this implementation, and our rankings have improved since then. The next slide will show you a photo in front of about 1,000 people we presented to Governor Ralph Northam. And then the next slide will simply talk a little bit about the focus areas of Blueprint Virginia 2025. This is the blueprint we're updating. And Dr. Trent chairs, or co-chairs, I should say, the Workforce and Education Industry Council. And I want to thank her for being here with me today. And I'm going to turn it over to her in just a minute to talk about some of the focus areas in this section and some of the results of the surveys that we've had in this area. But the other areas are important as well, and we have goals and objectives in each of those. Again, focusing on endorsing ideas and public policy, working with policymakers to implement the blueprint. Next slide. So I need to obviously point out that while we're the best state for business, we've had a lot of economic challenges. Next slide. Not all of Virginia is growing at the same rate, and not all of Virginia has experienced recovery at the same rate. And this slide is just a way of demonstrating from February of last year to about April of this year, the darker shaded areas have had higher levels of unemployment than the lighter shaded areas. It's just an easy way to look at the regional impact. I'll talk a little bit about what the industry areas have been that have suffered the most. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Forgive me for interrupting, but my eyes aren't good enough.
Yeah.
That light blue, so Southern Virginia
Right.
has done better in
Well,
terms of recovery
they've
than
lost
Northern
less
Virginia?
jobs. They've lost fewer jobs. They've had, so same thing got my attention when I saw this from my team. So the Southern Virginia simply had fewer jobs lost as a percentage of their workforce than these other areas, the darker shaded areas. So Southern Virginia, Southwest Virginia. And I think if I go to the next slide, Kevin, well, two more. Virginia's done better in the U.S. This is simply a slide showing Virginia in the dark blue. Our unemployment rate's better than the U.S. And the next slide. So let me back up. I don't know that I'm going to have this industry council slide here. So leisure, hospitality, non-essential retail, those industries have been the hardest hit. And within those lightly shaded areas, they simply lost fewer jobs than the darker shaded areas. Yeah. This is, we asked VEDP to do some projections on bringing Virginia back to the employment levels that we were located in. And you'll see about first quarter of next year, although we're catching up, about first quarter of next year, I think Virginia will be back at the employment levels we were. The next slide, though, and again, because you're a statewide board, I know you'll focus on the importance of this. Think about Virginia regionally, and you start thinking about the urban crescent versus the rural horseshoe, and you start realizing the difference in recovery here. The urban crescent is going to recover and has been recovering much faster than rural Virginia. So as we put together this blueprint, it's a statewide document, but we know that growth occurs along economic boundaries, not political boundaries. And so we want to make sure we're thinking about those regional boundaries. That's why we have regional meetings. We participate and understand the regional goals and objectives, and we try to incorporate them into the blueprint recommendations. Kevin, next slide. Before I talk about the blueprint process, I'll just close this section by talking about how this COVID has impacted different population groups much more severely. And if you think about the economic challenges of that when you're putting together a new economic strategic plan, you want to keep in mind that impact on these groups and how it has impacted them differently. So this slide simply is a demonstration of how disproportionately some of those groups that are less educated, minorities, women, and lower wage workers, have been impacted in their unemployment rate. Another way on the next slide of showing it, I think, is a little easier to look at. If you look back at February of 20 versus February 21, and you see the dark blue of February 20 compared to the light blue of February 21, what you'll see in these specific population groups is a disproportionate impact of employment compared to the population at whole. So as we put the blueprint together, our advisory board and our steering committee is looking through multiple lenses. We're looking through regional lenses, which I just talked about, but we're also looking through lenses of making sure that we apply some equity to our recommendations. Next slide. Last year, as we started to lay the groundwork for Blueprint and work with the General Assembly, we put forward, through some work of the Chamber Board, an equality of opportunity agenda. And this recognizes that not all Virginians are participating at the same level. And so these are recommendations which we can send you a link to that we are leaning in on to help build the blueprint for 2030 on how do we close the education gap, the employment gap, and the entrepreneur gap. We also, for the first time as a chamber, endorsed some criminal justice reform so that we would not hold people outside the workforce opportunity because of some things in the past that may have been resolved and they have been restored, and yet they still are not able to have full employment. So we leaned in on that last year. And I think the business community has a responsibility to do this, and we'll have that as part of our blueprint update. Look forward to hearing your views on all these things. Let's go to the next section, and we'll talk about the blueprint process. We'll send you this. It's too small for me to read, but I'll tell you, we do have some specific recommendations on education around broadband, work-based learning, and some other areas that we can send you to consider as you all are thinking about public policy recommendations as well, and soft skill development. And again, even under these, there are more detailed recommendations. Our education recommendations come from human resource directors. We have HR, human resource people from our biggest membership that are in fact engaged in developing public policy recommendations for education. So that's where our ideas are coming from. We're very interested in professional educators' views as well, but these are the things that we see that need to be done. Next slide. So the blueprint process. How are we doing it, and what's our structure? And then the Blueprint Virginia 2030 business plan for the Commonwealth. We kicked it off last year. Next slide, Kevin. This is a diagram that is intended to tell you that it's an inclusive process. We have a steering committee, we have advisory board, we have strategic alliances with a lot of stakeholder groups. Over 100 groups are participating in the process itself. So it's not a Chamber of Commerce document, it's a business community document. So all the Go Virginia regions are participating and supporting it. We've invited school boards to participate, all the university presidents participating, the economic development community are participating. So it's a comprehensive approach. It takes about a year to develop, and it's a consensus document. We'll bring these recommendations back to our board, steering committee, advisory committee in the fall, and our goal will be to present them to the governor-elect in December of this year. Next slide. So this is a roadmap that essentially says the same thing. We kicked this off last year, holding public hearings throughout the state, meeting with stakeholders. This is a great time for us to be visiting with your board to make sure we're hearing from you about recommendations that you would like to see in the blueprint as we put it forward as an advocacy document for the Chamber of Commerce. Next slide. Again, these are virtual meetings that Go Virginia is holding for us. Yesterday, I had the Region 7 with over 350 people on. It's been amazing how, even though we've been in a pandemic, virtually we've had more people participate, and they're able to be engaged in the surveys. We give a little bit of a PowerPoint on the region. We hear from their region, and then we hear from people directly. I think my favorite was, these are open to the public, so I was doing one in Southwest Virginia, and I had university president speak, community college president come on and speak, and chamber come on and speak, and then I got this little hand raised from this lady I didn't recognize. I asked my staff to recognize her. She is sitting in a rocking chair on this porch with her iPad, and she was chewing something that wasn't gum, and she starts just telling me about education in the community and her thoughts on it, and she wants to be included. So I loved it. It took me back to public hearing days as the young mayor, and I thanked her for weighing in, for participating. So we have had every access. I had one of those in Northern Virginia yesterday, come in on the Zoom call and talk about, should we think about curriculum differently? Should we think about money differently? We need to rethink education. It's interesting. I mean, average citizens have a lot of thoughts that you can hear from if you've been involved in the stream of gathering thoughts. So these regional meetings have been great. Next slide. Again, we do have a workforce and education conference that will be actually in person on October 20th. We intend to invite the candidates for governor to this. We would love for you all to attend. We believe this will be in person. This will be our first in-person conference, October 20th. So mark your calendars for that, and Eric will be sure to work with our comms team to send you all invitations to attend that event. We have the whole floor of the convention center. I think we can do it socially distant. We'd love for you to participate in this conference. It's well attended. Dieter and I were talking earlier. This has been 800 to 900 people before. I think some of you on the board and Dr. Trent has actually spoken or been moderators at these events. This year, we're going to balance safety, but we're looking forward to having this in-person event. It's where higher ed, K through 12, all of us can come together to talk about this with our candidates for governor. Next slide. So this is a busy org chart, but I want you to know we have both a bottom-up process. The bottom-up process includes listening tours, regional approaches, subject matter experts and industry-specific councils coming up to the advisory board and then to a steering committee. Next slide. Our chairs of the steering committee are Nasik Keen, who's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company at SAIC. And you may know Ed Bain, who is the president of Dominion Energy Virginia. They chair the steering committee. Next slide. And then we have a number of subcommittees that are in place as well. And the next slide. Obviously, you know Dr. Trent. I do want to turn the program over to her for purposes of making this presentation. Acknowledge Jennifer Baird, an executive with Altria, who's her co-chair. And they're overseeing all the recommendations for the entire workforce pipeline. So early childhood, K through 12, certifications, and higher education. So I want to thank her for her willingness. It's a volunteer position, and like yours, and turn it over to her for a few slides and some results. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So good morning, everybody. It's good to be here with the Board of Ed once again. I want to express my gratitude as Barry did, and thanking you for allowing us to be here and to share and to have this conversation. It's a very important conversation to have. And then also, I want to again express my gratitude to Barry and the Chamber for asking me to co-chair this committee. I've said it to him before. I say it to a lot of people. This is probably one of the most consequential things that I'll be involved in. And so I'm very humbled by the invitation to chair this committee. As Barry said, Jennifer and I are the co-chairs. Basically, our job is to oversee the development of workforce and education component for Blueprint 2030. And I will say that Barry talked a little bit about this, but I'm not sure you quite understand what a robust engagement system that they have established over the years. This is, I think, the third blueprint that I've been involved with. I was involved in the very first one and at some capacity, and the second one. And so this is, but they have really, I would say they've cornered the market on how to engage all of the right people at the right time. And so part of what Jennifer and I are also doing is helping them to identify stakeholders and helping them to engage stakeholders across the state to be involved in this process. So next slide, please. I'm going to forget to say next slide, so Barry's going to help me. So this is who we are, right? We have a lot of areas in which we're focusing on, but I like to say that workforce and education, our committee is really gets involved in all of the fun stuff, right? We get to take the long view and look at the education and workforce landscape over the years, and then reimagine, kind of like what you do every day or in your meetings here, reimagine what education can and workforce can be in the next decade. And so applying some of the principles and applying some of the things that Blueprint is prescribing through this process to our education and workforce system, we really get to sit back and say, okay, now where do we want to be, and what do we want to do, and what do we want to look like in 10 years? And so like you and what you do on this board, this is like really a lot of fun to me, right? So being able to really think about where we're going to go. Next slide, please. So I will say that, and Barry touched on this a little bit, the recommendations, Blueprint 2025 call for targeted improvements and targeted investments in K-12, early childhood education, higher ed. And what Blueprint 2030 is doing is really building on those recommendations, right? And making sure that we are building on them, that we are improving on them, and that we're also incorporating some of the things that we've learned, lessons that we've learned, the valuable lessons that we've learned through COVID-19. Also really embracing the positive and the resiliency of virtual education. One of the conversations that Barry and I had when he asked me to chair this was around equity. That is a major focus of what they're trying to do through this. And so we'll be looking at that, and then also just really creating connectivity through workforce and education. And so our focus areas, as you can see, is early childhood education, systems improvements and accountability, building these pathways and supporting equity, as well as developing world-class talent. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Blueprint, and as Barry mentioned, Blueprint is a very, very collaborative process. We literally receive input from thousands and thousands. I think he just mentioned 4,000 individuals. One of the key ways that we do this is through our surveys. And so next slide, please. The Chamber uses 4 layers of surveying for this process. There's a statewide comprehensive survey that they use. The executive committee surveys, as he mentioned, that are broken out on these policy areas. The regional meetings that are broken down along the Go Virginia regions. And then they also have these signature events. He talked about the economic development conference. They are having a veterans conference coming up soon. They had a healthcare conference. And so that's also another way in which we survey our participants and make sure that their voice is also heard. And so the opportunity to really engage across the Commonwealth and across stakeholders is pretty vast as it relates to Blueprint 2030. And it really does give individuals who want to have a voice in this process, there are ample opportunities for them to do so. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example of some of the survey questions and some of the data that we collect through these surveys, we ask this of each of the regions, or ask these questions. I can't remember exactly how many questions there are. I think it's like 20, 25 maybe, I'm not sure.
It's almost 20 questions.
So these are just a couple of the examples. Which areas do you believe have the most impact on Virginia's overall economic competitiveness? By a large margin, most of the regions say workforce and education. And I think there's only 3 more regions that we're doing. And
this is every region surveyed.
So this is every region that has been surveyed so far. Next slide, please. And then the next another example is if Virginia can make additional investments in education and workforce development programs, where should the additional investments go? And you can see where the 2 top responses are. Internships and apprenticeships, obviously, in line with what you all did several years ago through the profile of a high school graduate. And so this is kind of the data that examples of the data that we have collected through these surveys. And this is going to be kind of the platform for how we roll out, or the platform for our education and workforce for Blueprint Virginia 2030. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Next slide, please. So again, just save the date. If you guys are available, we'd love for you to participate and join us for October 20th. Obviously, our economic summit, we hope to present and actually unveil the blueprint that day and the high-level recommendations and present it to the governor-elect. And then if you want to participate directly, the survey is available online. And we're collecting the statewide survey throughout the rest of the year. Next slide. Always include this if you're a Chamber of Commerce, by the way. I just want to, can't forget this slide. We are privately funded and privately supported, but these companies have all leaned in and want to be part of and are part of Blueprint. So thank each of them. Next slide. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our formal presentation. Thank you for listening and thank you for your interest. I'll be happy to have a dialogue on this and other related topics that Dr. Trent and I can respond to.
Yeah, again, thank you for the, very complete presentation about what you're doing. The board clearly has some, significant areas of overlapping interest with where the chamber is. I don't know how specific your recommendations get. Certainly, as Dr. Trent noted, we have had a fair amount of discussion here and work done with regard to workforce, and profile of a graduate is a good example of that. And I think, fully in line with what the chamber's objectives would be. That is to have a legitimate career path and training in our schools for that legitimate career path. I'll shift over for a second before I open this up to the board to the equity work that you mentioned. I think it's listed on your slide as a quality of opportunity agenda, in particular, closing the achievement gaps. And I guess now I'm sensitized enough to say that when we say closing the achievement gaps, we mean by lifting up all groups as opposed to dumbing down the top group. You can't be too careful in your speech these days. The concept of closing the achievement gap has been around for quite some time now. And frankly, there has not been, significant headway. I'm not going to say no headway because there has been some, but there has not been really a demonstration that we've been able to fully realize the goal of closing that achievement gap. Some of this deals with, I think, our boards, and we had some discussion about this just yesterday, sort of the recognition that education funding overall in the Commonwealth needs to be increased, that we are underfunding education as a category. And if we expect to have better results, then actually that is going to take more resources. And second, some of it deals with my view, and I think the board's view at this point, how the dollars are deployed. The board in the last 2 years has prescribed with our constitutional ability standards of quality, which had very specific recommendations or prescriptions as to how dollars ought to be deployed locally, or at least certain dollars ought to be deployed locally. Those changes or those proposed changes in policy, I guess, would be considered to have been revised out by the General Assembly, since it's their right to revise whatever we prescribe, and have not been adopted. Again, Barry, I think you and I had a discussion probably in December of 19 in person about this up in the governor's mansion. I think we were at an event and had a very quick discussion about this. And then, of course, COVID hit and sort of things stopped. I think, and I'll speak for the board on this, we would very much like to be involved in the recommendation process. We have spent a lot of time as a board doing, what we think are research-based, evidence-based recommendations. And again, it's not just a traditional, we want more. It's, we recognize if we keep spending in exactly the same way we're spending it today, although we might make some progress, we're not going to make the progress that, all of us want to see. I don't know, where in the process you are with regard to specifics. Honestly, I don't know how specific the blueprint gets. But if there is room in the process for our board, either through me or, Dr. Wilson or any other representative from the board, to get down to more detailed comments. I think we would certainly, as a body, appreciate that, and we look forward to working with the chamber as the General Assembly comes back into session and with the new governor, whoever they might be, to implement some of the things that we think are necessary to, make meaningful change in the direction here to close that gap. And again, we want to lift up, not pull down anybody. And I don't know if you want to respond to that,
Briefly,
Barry or Deetra.
If I could respond, I think
Sure.
Deetra can respond as well. Let me talk about the process first. So perfect timing right now for the process. We're in the summertime, gathering information, gathering recommendations. Parallel organizations to yours with other focus are actually sending us and sending Eric and our policy team very detailed recommendations on big themes. The past two blueprints have been aspirational in terms of goal setting and objectives, but have included some level of detail. So I'll just give you an example. When Dr. Templin was running the community college, that had a pilot program connecting with the K through 12 system and community college and George Mason. We call out those specific best practices in the blueprint as an example of what might be scaled for the state. So there are broad themes, but there are also some specific recommendations. And in terms of the timing, the summer is the perfect timing. We will begin in September to bring final focus on the actual recommendations that will be put before the October advisory board and steering committee. So probably within the next 5 to 6 weeks would be a great time to present data, present studies. We're getting them from different groups. And so, for example, the Early Childhood Foundation has been working with us very collaboratively on studies they've done and recommendations they've done. But the process is open. Now is the perfect time. I was glad we were invited for today for that reason. And let me turn to Dr. Trent to talk a little bit about some of the observations she has on funding and recommendations on results and outcomes, and anything else you'd like to say, of course, about the process.
Well, I want to really start with the process, and that is, as Barry said, this is a wonderful opportunity, and the timing is great, right? What the chamber has traditionally done has been to work with organizations throughout the summer, but also working with the Secretary of Education. I know when I was in ANWR in the administration, we met with Barry constantly about what the recommendations are around education. I know right now we would value your input. Eric would have the large scale recommendations or the recommendations that have come in. We certainly, I'm happy to work with him and whoever on the board to really have some discussion around those recommendations and have your input in those recommendations. I think that's very valuable. This is your job, like you said, right? This is where you have the evidence-based data behind all this, and so we welcome that. So,
Great.
and I'm happy to work with Eric or Barry or whoever, and you, Jamal, whoever else who's interested on the board to really go through them. And
think about the end game. So for us, the end game is advocacy, policy, and funding in the right places. So the blueprint is really a platform. If we get the recommendations right in the platform, it gives us an opportunity as a chamber to turn on the advocacy spigot to 27,000 business members on a specific initiative. So we've seen this formula work very well, and we like to advocate for funding for specific areas. If I could be that granular, we, for example, in economic development right now, we've missed about $30 billion of projects over 24 months because we don't have sites that are ready.
Yeah.
We don't have tier 4, tier 5 sites that are ready. So we're advocating right now, it's public information, I sent this to the governor and General Assembly, for $150 million of one-time money to build so many sites in every region so we might be able to get in that stream of economic development. We are that specific when it comes to an initiative. So if you have, as a board, some recommendations around any of those 4 pillars or other areas, we would put the concept in blueprint, and then each year we would advocate from the blueprint for specific dollars to specific programs. That's how this works over the next 24 to 48 months.
Yeah, and I would say also as an example, early on, we had some challenges around getting early childhood education into the budget. The chamber really got involved in that and really advocated on behalf of that. And now we are here today, right? So, this is a real partnership. And as Barry mentioned, we come here with the same, the same motivation as you all, and that's to making sure that all of our kids have an excellent opportunity in education. And so we do that working with you, and you are the experts, and you are in this much deeper than either Barry or I or anyone at the chamber. So we welcome the input.
Well, certainly, I appreciate being referred to as the experts, although as a former Secretary of Education, I don't know.
I'm not in the weeds like you are.
I know that you've got a fair amount of expertise in this area. And frankly, I know Barry, just by avocation, has a fair amount of expertise in this area. It would be helpful, I think, before, y'all leave, if we could coordinate, perhaps with Ms. Webb, how those lines of communication are going to go, because so often, time just begins to slip. And I know that this time frame is tight. And, I view this as an opportunity the board shouldn't miss to be involved in this project.
Exactly. Thank you. That's great.
Anybody else? I'm sorry to have started first. I usually don't, but I had a few things I wanted to say. So. Boy, they're never shy, but now.
Go first. All right. Well, first, just thank you all. The chamber's efforts on the blueprint generally and the focus on education workforce specifically are incredibly valuable to the Commonwealth, and we're grateful. And I know a lot of that, Barry, is your personal push to help the chamber serve the Commonwealth in this way. And you all have been doing this over the longer term in every round, and more focus on education and workforce. And I'm grateful. The heft you all bring to the conversation, and your ability to sort of look across sectors. So we all kind of get in our little lanes and our silos, and you all can step back and reach across and think about how the sectors connect. Cradle to career, so to speak, is really, really valuable. And I do know from my time, as Dr. Trent knows, in the McAuliffe administration, that how valuable it was. And particularly to the point you started with, this continuity point, where we turn over governors every 4 years. But, how do we have continuity? And the fact that we were able, when we were an incoming brand new administration, to have your blueprint there as we walked in the door, and know that that was not just a document you were handing us, but that was what the chamber was going to be advocating for. The business community had come together around those priorities, was really valuable. I have one process suggestion, and then just, I think, 3 comments on substantive areas. The process suggestion, in addition to meeting, I think it would be wonderful to have your leadership team meet with perhaps Dr. Wilson and Mr. Gecker, or with or without the superintendent. You all will figure that out. In addition to that, I would suggest, and we're really grateful for the chance to give you input today, substantive input. I would, in addition, I would suggest, if you haven't already, the stakeholder group of what we call the stakeholders, our usual suspects here on all our topics, do meet together, and they have some structure where they come together. A group that includes the Superintendent's Association, the VSBA, so school board members, superintendents, teachers, parents. Who am I forgetting? But there is the Principal Association, the curriculum group. Anyway, they all come together in varying degrees of collaboration, have in various ways over the years, and it'd be good to pull their ears into your vigorous conversation. particular areas that I thought I would comment on. One is the early childhood. I'm really thrilled to see that as one of your identified focus areas. And on that one, I would tie particularly to your continuity remarks. So that, we've done various things in the early childhood over various governors, but in this administration, there really has been a huge leap forward with potential for more federal money to come help fund the next level. And it would be wonderful if whoever the next administration is understands the value of some continuity on that work. And this shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be partisan at all. In particular, the current administration has moved the ball forward, not just on expanding formal pre-K schooling opportunities, but has really moved the ball forward on the early childhood workforce issues, which were huge, and has moved the ball forward on how we ensure all of our resources are working together towards quality early childhood experiences in both the public and private settings. The advances, and I'm sure you're familiar with all this, on the quality rating initiative, and shifting the leadership over here. And we're still learning our ropes here in our oversight role, and Dr. Mann brings a wealth of experience to that, which we're really grateful for. But it would be wonderful to see those initiatives taken to the next level, whoever the leadership is, and you all can really help make that happen. You have your two focus areas of equity and talent. I love seeing them back to back, and I think there's a big intersection of those. And one of the items I'm sure Mr. Gecker et al. Will help raise up is our SOQ recommendations really do work at the intersection of equity and talent. We understand from the research that getting our high quality teachers to our neediest kids is a crucial imperative, and one we're not meeting yet. That our teacher shortages, our experienced teacher shortage, our quality teacher shortage are all that much more severe in our schools that are serving our most disadvantaged students. And I say, when we get to the point where the low-income schools are hiring teachers away from the suburbs, to both our urban high poverty communities and our rural needy communities, then we'll know we've gotten to a successful point. And we are a long ways from that. But I think our SOQ recommendations, with their focus on the intersection of equity and teachers as the crucial resource, are valuable. One thing we don't address in the SOQ, because it doesn't really fit in terms of, we don't have a mandate to set teacher salaries, but I think teacher salaries are crucial, and I would hope that you all will help support the effort to improve Virginia's standing. I know this from my academic work on education policy, that teachers coming out with a 4-year degree are how their salaries compare to other 4-year degree holders. It's just bottom of the barrel, and it just can't work over the longer haul. So the teacher workforce, I really raise that up. And then one just very small but important thing, recognizing your very focus on within workforce on STEM kinds of fields. The work the department is doing on math pathways, I raise up for your consideration. And this really started with some of the community, if I understand correctly, the community college leadership started with focusing on how do we, they were looking back to the K-12 world and realizing kids coming from K-12 to community colleges didn't have the math skills, the numeracy skills they needed, and recognizing that bumps in the road from students going from community college to 4 years. And so started this Pathways initiative that's now encompassing all sectors, and how do we help raise up the rigor level but also smooth the pathway. And so I call that up for your consideration for something that might be worth endorsing, specifically that one of those things that doesn't necessarily cost extra money. It just means being innovative and forward thinking.
Thanks for those specifics.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Wilson?
Just very quick couple questions, and thank you all very much for your presentation and your support and your being here. and maybe it's too early to say, but I do recall you saying, Mr. Duvall, that you are gathering themes, that comments from your surveys seem to be coalescing around certain themes.
Yes.
Maybe it's too early to share,
Yeah.
but I'd be curious to hear a couple of those. One, two, as we think about what COVID-19 has taught us, right? So not necessarily the immediate reaction to COVID, but looking further ahead, 2030 and beyond, are there lessons learned that you are hearing as it relates to workforce and education that we will hold on to as kind of a positive remnant of COVID-19?
I'll be glad to address that. One theme that you may, obviously you've heard this term before, but the business community is interested in this theme of connecting learning to earning. And that's just a general theme. I speak with university presidents about this, community college presidents about this, and it doesn't diminish the business community's view of soft skills or non-technical skills, but just if we can begin to express ourselves as a business community, is that people will come through our education pipeline with all the skills to connect what they've learned to having an opportunity to be productive in whatever they choose to be productive in. But connecting earning to learning is a theme around which I'm seeing emerge from surveys and the business community. So I'll mention that. Are there any themes you want to talk about?
So I haven't had a chance to really look at the surveys, and I was just trying to think if there are others that I've heard. I know that's the one, connecting the learning to earning is the one that we talk about the most, and also we are beginning to talk about a little bit at George Mason even. So, but I haven't seen the results. I'm not sure.
And then again, these are early results.
Yeah.
I think the lessons learned is just the need to make sure that every student is connected at home with technology that allows them to continue their learning. What does that look like? I think it's what the governor's doing right now, significant investments in upgrading our broadband technology and our connectivity. That's important, I think, for certainly the education system. It's important for the business community. What I think we haven't realized yet is the potential for helping small metros, inner city, and rural Virginia to come back in the stream of commerce by creating employment centers outside of heavily populated metro areas. I think this is a national opportunity for us that we should view. I get a chance to say things like this publicly. We should view the implementation of broadband across rural America as seriously as leaders did in the 1930s and 40s about creating co-ops and electrification of America. We should view it that seriously. And what the federal government did was made it possible by having the right grant programs that can be paid back to allow that to happen. So I'd love to see some big national thinking on this, to the extent that we can have state thinking and state leadership and state money to help us, because the connectivity of a child going through school is just as important to me as the connectivity of a remote worker. Well, I will say, why is Virginia's unemployment rate and why are our revenues at the state level doing so much better than so many other states? It's because we have a high degree of knowledge-based workers, and it's because those workers have been able to continue. 6 weeks after the pandemic hit, I was talking to CEOs around the state. It wasn't uncommon for me to have one say to me, oh, 9,000 people working for me, got 840 of them remote working, fully operational, 90% of their workforce remote working within 3 weeks. And they invested in the technology so that at their home, they would be just as secure. I mean, we need to think about education in a longer term. You asked me about long term. I see that as the theme for us in Blueprint, as well as the near-term connecting learning and earning. I hope that helps answer your question.
And I just wonder what this increased connectivity can do for our teacher shortage, right? When you look at where we are lacking our teachers in some of the most hard to serve areas, wouldn't it be great if we could zoom in some of our teachers from Fairfax County, some of the, the best schools that we have into Petersburg. And, what would that mean for our students, right? So we do have a lot of opportunity to really think about, this new world that we're in, and how do we, like I said, reimagine education in a way that we can really explode in the next, and make sure that equity is there across the board. So.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Duran, then Dr. Mann.
Thank you for being here. Nice to see you, Dr. Trent, as always. One area as you highlighted, a data point you shared around equity was that 45% of those earning less than $22 an hour were Hispanic. And I think an opportunity here for a partnership, because in Northern Virginia, there are some good examples of adult education partnering with K-12 public school systems, community colleges to help prepare in the workforce, certifications, all kinds of things. But the barrier we often see for that particular population is the lack of ability to understand English and being able to develop English at a proficiency level, even pass the certifications. I've personally seen them in their courses really knowing and being able to do the content, the hands-on, and discussing with them in Spanish, how excited they are about what they're learning, but they're not able to pass some of the assessments. So I would love to see, as part of your blueprint, a real investment from the state in adult ESL for our high school students, really a robust statewide effort on how we need to make sure that so many of those individuals, now 45%, have the ability, but don't, to actually learn the content, to actually partake in these workforce development, but yet there's a barrier for them there. And so how do we join? And as you said a minute ago, I think you said you're showing examples. There's some good examples of how that's happening with the K-12 public school division, community college, and then we're partnering together to make sure that our in many cases, those are our parents that we're serving in the public schools, right? And so I think that would be a robust, specific example of how we could help develop.
Thank you for that.
That's a great idea.
Wonderful recommendations. Thank you all.
Dr. Mann.
Like my colleagues, I share my enthusiasm for the presentation and all of the great information you're sharing. And of course, it's not going to be surprising, and I'm going to reinforce just a couple of comments that Ms. Holton made, but also lift up another point related to early childhood. Had it not been for the board meeting yesterday, I would have been on the call for the Northern Virginia region that you all hosted on yesterday. But I would like to say that, it's great to hear that you're engaging with VECF around early ed and thinking very specifically about some of the ways in which there are some specific recommendations that could be made to help support what needs to happen in early childhood. But I'm also thinking about the importance of the business community separate and apart from the advocacy support around public funding, because early ed is an area that is public-private, right? It doesn't have a dedicated public funding stream that supports its ability to provide care and education birth forward. And I think there is a real opportunity to engage the business community in thinking about some of the very entrenched financing challenges that the sector faces. We tend to think about preschool education as sort of the education domain, and childcare is now integrated. This board has charge over that area. And I feel like if the workforce is going to be strong in our region and businesses are going to be strong, focusing on how we are supporting the cost of care is critical. And where is the creativity within the business sector to really help us solve that problem? Certainly public funding is important, but I don't think that's the sole answer. And so there is an opportunity to delve into that. And I'd be curious about your thoughts. I know early ed has been a part of the blueprint since its inception, which has been outstanding, but we have a lot of work to do if we're going to stabilize a sector that's vital to the economic vitality of the Commonwealth.
I'll start with a quick story. Probably 7 years ago, I asked Mike Petters to come and speak at an education conference, one of the conferences that we were holding on education. He currently is president of Huntington Ingalls with Jones Newport News Shipbuilding. They have 45,000 employees. They have 20,000 employees, 25,000 now in Virginia. he opened his comments by saying he wanted to talk about a national security issue and what he thought was the most important national security issue in America. And he went on to say it was early childhood education. And he laid out an entire presentation on that topic. And ultimately found its way in the Wall Street Journal as an op-ed. And he's probably one of the best messengers. And he stated it this way. He said, I have one customer, it's the United States Navy. We build the ships for the United States Navy. I know I'm going to have that customer 20 years from now. I know how to finance those projects for the next 20 to 40 years, but I don't have a guarantee that I'll have a workforce to produce it. And the workforce 20 years from now is in early childhood stages today. And so it was such a clear statement on behalf of the business community. And I think if you look at the business community in terms of size and scope, the larger sectors are funding and can fund and should be asked to fund a number of these initiatives. And I think there is a growing willingness to do that. We, through our blueprint, are not simply advocating for public policy, but we're also advocating for private policy. And I think we can capture some of your recommendations today and make sure they're part of the blueprint process. I know there's a lot of funding coming in from the private sector. I don't know how efficient it is, and I don't know how broad-based it is, but we should lean in on that. And I thank you for that recommendation because we want to ensure that we capture it. But it is a priority. And the last thing I'll say is something Dr. Trent said earlier. For whatever reason, the business community broadly gets a lot more credibility and gets to weigh in on things than some of the other stakeholders in the world. And I think we should take that responsibility seriously. And the one way we did in 2012 and 13 was moving early childhood education out of the political arena where it was a right or left issue and it was a social issue. By putting it in the blueprint, it became an economic issue. And by putting it in the blueprint, it depoliticized it. So I was able to work in the last 10 years with Republican governors, Democratic governors, Republican members of the General Assembly, Democratic members of the General Assembly to advance those causes. So I hope that the lessons from that can be applied to some K through 12 ideas that I'm hearing relative to how do we focus investment, how do we spend our dollars, can we pay differentially for different areas for teacher salaries that we have different needs. Believe me, those are market-based principles that work. And we would be all in supporting those and depoliticizing those if that's something that's helpful for you all. But thank you for your comments and for your recommendations. Do you have anything to add?
I have nothing to add.
Dr. Lane asked for a few comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay.
And I'll just offer the opportunity to speak directly with department leadership if you want, as always. And I know Ms. Holton mentioned all the associations, and Dr. Trent, I can make an introduction to VPEC. They kind of all sit together now and have a coalition where you don't have to go to each individual one.
That'd be great.
Couple of thoughts on slide 20. You don't have to go to the slide, but on slide 28, you talk about the promoting the soft skills. And I would just encourage that we work together on using the same nomenclature. In the ed world, the board has adopted a profile of Virginia graduate. They talk about the 5 C's as being the critical skills. When you look at what you list as the soft skills, communication, problem solving, teamwork, leadership, that's essentially our 5 C's. And I think that if we can get the business community talking about the 5 C's in the way that the education community is, I think that will just bring some synergy. And then to the core slide 39, which is where you list the 5 areas. Not for today, but I think we could maybe in bullet 2 think about how to define system improvements to be a little bit more direct. Is that the funding system? Is that the education delivery system?
Yeah.
So on and so forth. And I have some ideas on that for another time. I have the benefit of this being my second time seeing it too. So, but the broader points that I had, and one of this echoes something Ms. Holton said. I really feel like any blueprint has to have a teacher focus in it. The word teacher has to be there because we have a looming crisis with the retirees post-COVID and the shortage issues, and we had some of those issues even before. And then the other one for me, and this could be wrapped into system improvements, but with what we've seen with the NAEP results in Virginia, I think that we really need to have a specific literacy focus somehow, so that it's clear that this isn't just, a K-12 issue, but something we really need to do as a community. And then my last thought is, I obviously appreciate the fourth bullet on supporting education equity. I would love to hear ideas later, not today, on how we can depoliticize that, because I think that should be a nonpartisan issue as well.
We'd love to have those. I know, Eric, we're taking notes and capturing your thoughts, but if you have specific recommendations around language for teachers, whether it's teacher pay, credentialing, retention, if there are statistics that that we could include as motivation for these policies, please provide those directly to us, Dr. Lee.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
We value that. Thank you so much.
And Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, mine is more of a comment. I was going to refrain just from offering it because it was, but once you quoted my CEO and you reinvigorated his passion that he is so good at articulating, that we have, which is a focus on the workforce. And, not only are we keeping them safe and sending them home every day, but where in the world are we going to get them from? So the discussion around workforce development is very familiar to me. And the comment I was going to offer was more just complimentary of this initiative. I've had the privilege of being a part of this as a representative of Huntington Ingalls, and I participate in a lot of regional workforce initiatives efforts. So many of them doing so many great things, and so many of them doing a lot of the same things, and so many of them with such great intent, but such broad brush opportunities and focus that it's really hard to kind of really zero in on actionable things that can make a difference. And the best part of the presentation that I enjoyed today was the earlier slides where you talked about your vision very succinctly and your mission very succinctly. And that's one of the hardest things to stay anchored in when you do anything with a regional kind of focus on it. Preaching to the choir, got it. But my whole point is that I just wanted to compliment this initiative because it is very easy to look at workforce issues in the here and now. And it's almost overwhelming. Yeah. So it's like, if you don't get your arms around it and do something now about the pipelines now, then, how are we going to kind of get from under? It's very rare to find an organization that recognizes the importance of that, but says, you know what, we've got enough people working on them right now. We need to be looking 5-10 years down the road in a very strategic, focused way. And that's what I appreciate about this group. You mentioned before that survey information is still coming in. I did sit in on one of the calls where you guys had briefed out some initial survey feedback. One of those survey takers did recommend that there'd be great opportunity and alignment for Blueprint to partner with the Board of Education and get this in front of the Board of Education as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I know you're still reviewing your survey information, but you guys are still actionable on things, whether you realize it or not. That was a recommendation that was presented in a previous, because I think it is an important partnership. I think the ideas that have already come up today, and just the potential that these two organizations have to really influence change, I think it's really good. So I just really wanted to give a plug, because I sit on a lot of calls, a lot of committees, a lot of good things happening, but a lot of times it's easy to get distracted. Yeah. And just to see your stakeholder membership, how much that's grown, that's a great equation for paralysis by analysis, where you get too many people in the room and you don't really move. And that's quite the contrary with this group. Been impressed so far, looking forward to what could come of it. So. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you all for having us today. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you for the suggestions that have come across so far. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again for being here. It's always good to see you all.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you all.
Okay, we will move on to commend to you the written reports, and then we'll move on to discussion of current issues. Anybody have any current issues they would like to discuss? Ms. Holton?
Thank you. Well, I did want to raise up the what we the topic that we heard about in public comment and recognizing the opportunities and limits of our authority. I'm interested in hearing the board's thoughts on what, if any, you all know how passionately I feel about my Richmond Public Schools and our partnership with them on behalf of the students. And so I'm just interested in what, if any, I mean, I think we all recognize that actual building, school construction is probably outside of our purview in any real direct way, but it raises, the conversation we heard raises up some more general issues. And I recognize that, there's some really good things going on in the city. I know that for those of you who may not have seen the reports, the graduation rate in RPS went up by like 10 percentage points this year. It was a huge gain, particularly among the Latino community, where frankly, the graduation rates have been abysmal, and they're actually moving towards reasonable. And there's some other gains that have been made. So there's some things going right, but there's still some real remaining challenges. And I know we are deeply engaged. The department is deeply engaged with the city through the school improvement process. And I guess my question would be, how can the board be helpful to the department's efforts on school improvement, particularly with respect to Richmond City?
And Mr. Gecker, I can level set just a few things so that all board members know some of the activities going on, of course, if that's okay with you.
Please.
The Richmond Public Schools is under an MOU. They're one of our 5 districts. And several months ago, we identified governance as a potential concern. It was in their academic review and addressed in certain places. So we asked them by letter to adopt a new governance manual, and they did not have a formal one, at least that they were following. And we gave them a deadline of July 1st. And I'm pleased to say they did do that. And so I think that was really our first step, just to make sure that there was structure there. I thought a lot of the comments you heard today was around governance and how they govern. And so I think that we continue to support them there. We also do, as part of the MOU, require school board training. And certainly we address best practices in that. Right now, their primary partner for that is the VSBA, and they do that twice a year. In addition to that, the board president and I meet with their board twice per year to review where they are on their own strategic plan, and at the same time our corrective action plan, and work on strategies there. And then of course the school improvement team is there almost on a daily, weekly basis. We approve every purchase order, as an example, every hire, and we are in the process of working with all of our MOU school districts to develop some summaries of the activities of the previous year. And so those are not complete yet, but when those are complete, I'd be happy to bring you a summary of activities so you have a sense of the things going on. And but that doesn't mean that we can't do more. I just want to make sure everybody knows some of the things that we do with Richmond, and that governance was specifically addressed in the last 6 months.
So as a follow-up, Dr. Lane, into what Ms. Holton said, for the parents and the folks that came here, who will be reaching out to them, and what might we be able to share with them about what we can do, what we are going to do? Obviously, I think they're aware of the MOU. They shared that in their public comment, but I would love for us to have some meaningful conversation with them after they came to us today to talk about what it is that we can and can do. Mr. Gecker tried to do that and did that well at the end of their public comment, but I think a more meaningful conversation. Can you talk to us about what that might look like and what you can do?
Yeah, every person that writes into public comment or even speaks at public comment hears back from a member of the staff. It's not always the same person, but certainly we'll follow up with them directly. And that's what we do.
You mentioned they worked on governance issues through the MOU agreement. And so I know we can't talk about the specifics of the agreement, but I do get curious about when districts are under MOUs for whatever reason, are we focusing on whether they're doing the things they're supposed to do? I mean, to create a structure around governance and have policies and procedures that govern that, do we also look at the extent to which they're living by those things that they create as a result of the corrective action engagement effort? I'm just curious about that.
I think that we are much more active in ensuring that they're doing what they say they've done in the administration. The board and elected officials is a little bit more of a challenge because they're not hired by the school division per se. I mean, I know they get a salary, but they're hired by the citizens, and they respond in the way that they feel like is appropriate to citizens, and there's not accountability for jobs and things like that. And then certainly the way that that person engages with the community is also up to interpretation, right? That they may engage with the community in other ways than the folks in public comment may suggest. And so that's a little bit more complex. That's probably a long way of me saying we can't make board members do anything, but certainly we can provide them best practices, and I think we do that.
No, I meant more so in terms of if you have a governance, if you created rules that dictate how you're going to create periods for comment, input. I really mean the technicalities, not so much whether you're satisfied with the outcome or not of having deployed your process. I'm more wondering about, it seemed like we heard in comment, there were some questions about whether there was even a following of releasing information in enough time for public comment. I mean, the things that really go to the technicalities of what do your rules suggest about?
Right. And again, whereas we do not police that should be self-policed by the board and the board chair, frankly, but you as a board could create rules for yourself and at the board meeting vote to suspend the rules, and that happens from time to time.
I think James points out one of the difficulties of the entire MOU process right now. I will say that 6 years ago, we were much less involved in the MOU jurisdictions than we are today. And even today, the levers that this board has are pretty limited. And I would say that, what we try to do, and, James can, fill in and correct some of this, but, clearly it is now the department's belief, and I think our belief, that the leadership of the divisions matter. That includes not only the superintendents, and as you know, with all the MOU jurisdictions, we have the ability to at least interview and approve in a sense, although not final approval, the superintendent candidates. But also governance from the board sense, which is why, things like the governance manual in Richmond became such an important issue. We can't, though, deal with how individual board members relate to their constituents. That's past our purview. And really, the reason I think we get to talk at all about board governance and then, division governance, so the elected officials, elected/appointed, depending where you are, and then the, hired superintendent, is because all the evidence suggests that the leadership does matter, even up to the school board level. I will say, and, we have not had this discussion specifically with Richmond, but we have had it with another jurisdiction, how sort of the public dissent sometimes adversely impacts the ability of the division to do their job to educate the kids. And, there is, not that we expect unanimity in every board, but we do expect at least a focus of the boards on improving educational outcomes as opposed to potentially some other issues at times. And again, this is not a Richmond specific thing because it has come up elsewhere. We at some point need to make a decision, how involved in local life we are going to be. That's in part a policy, and we're going to be restricted by code and constitution. But we have, I think, as a body and as a department, stayed a little bit away from, and I'm not saying this is inappropriate. I mean, it really is a policy decision that at some point we ought to talk about, interfering dramatically in the local life. That is, we have, as a body and as a department, respected the constitutional concept that operation of a local school division is within the purview of its board, and have not tested the limits of what that means, particularly with regard to, the MOU jurisdictions. I think as we place a higher emphasis right now on the Office of School Quality, then, and I see this respectfully, in terms of what their role ought to be, as we increase the resources given to the idea that we are going to, as a state, come in and assist jurisdictions in achieving a quality outcome. We need to discuss how far we are willing to go and test the limits, if you will, of state versus local. And, again, I'm not prepared to answer that question today at all, but I do think as we move forward, it is a legitimate question. And, it's been interesting to me. I was in local government before this, and, certainly, although we might disagree, the one thing we agree on is the state's got no right to tell us to do anything, right? We could have 3-2 votes all the time, except when the issue is, can the state tell us something? And then it's a clear 5-0. No, you can't. So, perhaps nothing builds consensus as much as our intervention. Maybe we ought to intervene everywhere. Not just kidding there, but it's a policy discussion, worthy of some time. And again, if the direction of the department continues to be to increase resources toward, school improvement in those divisions that, by code come under our wing a little bit, it's something we probably ought to do sooner rather than later, quite frankly, because it is unclear now what our guidelines are. I will say again that the department, in my view, and just haven't seen it over a 6-year period, has done more recently in terms of stressing certain things, good governance, both at the board level and at the superintendent level, and then moving on down through the building level than we had been doing. And again, not because of any lack of, any desire in the department's personnel not to do certain things, but it was just directional and resource-based. I mean, we used to have, a single person essentially doing this stuff. And, I don't know where the department will go under, whatever comes next. But if it is in the direction of enhancing those resources, we ought to have policy there. And, right now also under the MOUs, the board, not the BDOE, but the board has got, almost no rights except to the required meeting with superintendent, school board chair, school board vice chair, and Dr. Lane and myself. I mean, that's really what we have. And I'm not sure as we go forward that, we should continue that, or if perhaps we ought to give our board a few more rights. But there's no point in taking rights if we're not going to exercise them in a positive way, right? I mean, the worst thing we can do is, I think, say we're now stepping in and then not have the ability to make things better. Yeah, Dr. Wilson.
So I do think what I heard, and I think we all did, was the group of speakers asking for help, almost help us know what to do, as much as do something, help us know what to do. And so I think, to Dr. Duran's question about staff and the way we respond, to the extent that it's appropriate, Dr. Lane, does it make sense as staff responds to speakers to help them, in some ways, to help people think through what the avenues available to them may be? And I know that is a very slippery slope, but notwithstanding the board's policy conversation, there is an immediate need that these folks have expressed to us. And so how do we position ourselves best to be responsive without being inappropriately leading? And I do think it is a balance. And that's what I hear people asking, to help us know what to do.
And certainly, I think the team does a nice job of responding with where you should direct if we can't support you. In this specific case, whereas many of the comments were couched in how we can improve governance, and I'd suggested some of the ways we've done that, it really was a concern with a specific decision that the board made, and one that I think is within their legal rights.
And as you suggest, Dr. Wilson, it is a slippery slope. I mean, you and I, a number of us have been here long enough to remember all the discussions about, for example, special ed. And if areas where we didn't have a lot of control, and I think everybody was very sympathetic, but I can not imagine us having staff or the board give advice to all of those people who spoke before us in those days about how to accomplish the goal you're looking to accomplish, let alone deciding whether the board thinks that the goals the speakers are looking to accomplish are in fact the correct goals for the jurisdiction. And so, I'm very, all of us who grew up in local government, very, very sensitive to the need and, the desire to respond to the public. But, I really caution that we stay within our lane. We do what it is supposed to do. I will also say that it is my experience, limited though it may be, that sometimes, conversations that are not immediately reported to the press, may have more impact than conversations that may in fact end up immediately reported to the press, and which is not to say I don't believe in transparency and full disclosure and all that stuff. But I mean, all of us know it, at times positions harden prematurely when they are brought to light too quickly, when in fact reasonable compromise or reasonable solutions could have been found had the dialogue been allowed to continue privately for a little while longer. And so, I hesitate to, say that that's a path we ought to go down, which is not to say, again, I responded to those folks, so, but it was not, here's what you're going to do. It's we are going to discuss this, and I think we are, in fact, discussing it.
And on that point, I will say, just because they may do something within their legal rights and therefore we don't step in, doesn't mean we don't disagree from time to time with some of the decisions. I won't speak to this specific case. And we offer our advice on that all the time. And sometimes it's taken, and sometimes it's not.
So I think that working to be respectful of the local role, absolutely crucial, and I appreciate you all's careful guidance on that. I do think that just hearing the passion today helps raise up for me the question of what is our role. And one thing that is our role is making sure that we do our oversight role of the whole school improvement system that we have put in. I mean, the school improvement system is part of our SOAs. I mean, it is part of our responsibility. And we have instituted a system that does involve more robust engagement between the department and divisions that have been identified as not yet serving the students as well as we hope and want them to. And so these 5 divisions that have been identified as having sufficient challenges as to need MOUs, we do have more opportunity and responsibility to make sure our system is working well vis-a-vis those 5 jurisdictions. And so in that spirit, I would say, I mean, I understand the president and superintendent's emphasis on the authority we don't have, but we do have some authority, withholding funding in certain circumstances is one, and one we don't want to exercise lightly because it impacts students, and we can only exercise it in very limited circumstances according to our SOA structure. And yet, it's not that we have no authority. And I would encourage that we use this occasion to make sure we're doing everything we can to do increase our own understanding of how our school improvement system is working. And it was also addressed in the JLARC report, which we know that it's not working at optimal level, partly because of staffing issues. But what can we do to help enhance that system, even if we're not going to even if it's not going to lead to some kind of immediate action item for the board? It's helpful for us to understand more about what is and isn't working about our school improvement system. So all of that to say, I'd love to have, and I know we do get occasional updates, but I'd love to have more regular updates or even just a soon update on all of our MOU jurisdictions, and how are they doing, and what are we doing to help them do better, and what's working and what's not, that kind of a conversation.
I think that's fair, and I certainly don't expect, I would certainly expect that we can have more regular updates. Although, again, cautious because you don't want to impede progress when progress is in fact being made, albeit not yet showing up in the data we keep. I would ask that as we discuss this, you try to separate out the role of the board from the role of the department. And, we have seen in the popular press recently some blurring of the lines and confusion about what is the board and what is the department. And it's not that I'm trying to drive a wedge between us and the department. That's not the point at all. But the truth is that, and again, I think I mentioned this, our MOUs give great rights to the department, give very few rights to the board. And I am certainly would be happy to make changes in how we do the MOUs to provide more rights at the board level. I remember talking about my first board meeting when we did the Petersburg MOU, and everybody was all excited. I'm thinking, well, this gives no teeth to anybody. There were really no ways for the board to intervene. I'm thinking, why is everybody so happy? Well, we were happy because we were, saw some progress coming, but in terms of what rights it gave us, pretty minimal, from the lawyer's perspective. And, but just as we talk about this, and frankly, as you see it in, there was one commentator down in one of the Norfolk papers that I actually called and said, on one of the political issues of the day, he said, you mentioned the board. I said, there's no evidence the board has done anything you've said. And they said, well, the department. I said, well, we are not the department. If you look at even things like, I was with some folks this morning talking about, the masks, what are the advice there. People think we do that. But in truth, as far as I know, there's not a single member of the board who was involved in giving advice on the masks policy that just came out yesterday. Purely department and executive branch. So I'm not fussing about it, but I think that as we talk, we also need to be careful not to blur that line.
That's very helpful. I appreciate the reminder. On the particular, the authority to withhold funds under certain circumstances, is that board or department or board acting on department recommendation?
And actually, it's mandatory.
So that is a board authority item, and the other board authority item obviously is just our ability to take into account the operation of our current school improvement system as we think through the SOAs that put it into place. But yes, very helpful clarification. Thank you.
And that specifically, that language states that should a board not be in compliance with the corrective action plan, you shall reduce their funds. And they met that deadline on the governance piece.
Okay. Anybody else on that topic?
President Gecker,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to say, just to chime in with everyone, I was very impressed with the speakers who came in today with their passion and and their organization as you gave them credit for that. And this is a very timely conversation because I was struggling with those same thoughts while they were speaking. And I've been thinking about how other school systems, even though they may not be under the MOU right now, and school facilities and all of the issues going on with the inequity of school funding and facilities, or not funding, but the facilities and older schools. And I'm just wondering, how is that going to impact us as we move into the future? Because workplace conditions are one of the main reasons why we retain teachers or we lose teachers. And the condition of our schools is very important, especially in our end of the state. And it's very upsetting, and it's confusing, and it's a very hot topic right now. And I want to thank everyone for going into the depth that you have. And President Gecker, you helped me to clarify a couple of points there, and I appreciate what you were saying with the role of the board and the role of the DOE. And thank you. And we're at a precarious point right now, and it's very well said, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mr. Geiger, I can just respond to Ms. Davis-Vaught real quick. I think the best lever the board has on the facilities piece is this forthcoming item on the standards of quality we mentioned yesterday. You put it in the standards of quality, and then we can hold them accountable like an MOU district if they're not in compliance. But that we're going to need some time on that.
Okay, Dr. Mann.
One thing I was going to not say, but I feel compelled because I guess I'm thinking about the conversation we're having, and it's making me appreciate the complexity of pushing for change and how understanding rules and process and where levers are and aren't. And it's just mind-blowing to think about how you have to be sophisticated about those things in order to really get things done, make change happen. And it's not something that, it's just, I'm just kind of left very struck by that reality and what communities face as they are truly trying to save their children and the opportunities that their children should be having.
And Dr. Mann, that's what I was inarticulate in expressing, because communities don't necessarily understand all of the levers. And so to the extent that we can help educate it, but I was not as eloquent as you were in that. And so thank you for clarifying it and making that statement so plainly.
I agree.
Yeah.
Very well said. Thank you.
I think we all feel that. I think we also have to recognize that change in the context of government is a long process, right? And so you have people wanting immediate results on certain things that we're just not geared to do. I remember yesterday's lunch talking about how long it takes to get regulations through the process, right? You're looking at 18 to 24 months just to get regs through. So I think, as part of, Barry's presentation today, one of the things most meaningful is the long-term view and continuing to set the goalposts. When we first prescribed the SOQs, we talked about basically having policy bend toward it over a decade. I'm hoping it occurs sooner than that. But realistically, what we do is we set out markers and hope that the policy bends toward those markers. There are days when that is an incredibly frustrating thing. And there are days when you see incremental progress that you think, it's all been worth it. But I can tell you that, 8 years from now, I think we'll be happier with where we are than we might be today as we continue to lay out the long term, which, is the role of the board at this point. I know we have some immediate things we deal with, but by and large, we continue to set out the long-term vision. And it is, you can't be human and not react to the clear anguish in the people who are here today as they talk about educating their children. You just cannot. But, we continue to do what we can do. And I think, I would take the board's discussion today as sort of authority to discuss, certainly at the next meeting we have with RPS, the issues that were raised before us today, and, talk about how, stuff we might shy away from in other circumstances. I think we, can't shy away from when it's been brought to our attention in this way. All right, I know it's now afternoon, and frankly, given as quick as the agenda went this morning, I thought we'd be out of here at 11. But I would just like to say, the next couple years, the plan is to, continue to develop the SOQs, continue to march down the work plan. I do think we're going to do a fair amount of work on the importance of building leadership and how we do that. Hopefully, the SOA revisions will come through fairly soon. But I've been pretty happy with the amount of work this board has done in pretty important subject areas. And, I always leave out early childhood because I, just yield to the experts on it. But clearly, as the board, will now have control over, the entire process, basically birth to, grade 12. We have a lot of work to do to fulfill the mandate to provide a high-quality education system for all the children of the Commonwealth. So look forward to the next couple of years of the journey. Dr. Duran.
I was waiting for that conversation to change. I am co-chairing on behalf of invitation from Superintendent Lane, the Culturally Responsive and Inclusive Education Practices Group.
Great.
And we are at the final stages of working towards bringing forth some recommendations to the board, and some will be for the General Assembly, some will be departmental changes. So I just want to let everyone know that I'm really excited to have served in that role, and thank you, Dr. Lane, for the invitation to serve on that role, co-chairing with the Dean from Dr. Dare, as well as some General Assembly members, Senator Boysko as well, who helped lead the charge to have it put in code that we had to have this. So it's really good to have this happening, because I think now in the time when equity has been a discussion point that has been malaligned and not exactly spoken about in truths, having the ability for school divisions to be given the guidance and the direction and the requirement to focus on the type of learning that our students are experiencing, so that all student stories are being told, is very important. So I'm looking forward to bringing these forward to you all as a liaison from the state board. That should be coming fairly soon in the next couple of months. So.
Great. We appreciate your service there. Can't think of anybody better to do it. All right, then. I think that covers all we wanted to cover today. We'll see you in a couple months. Dr. Davis-Vaught, we hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you, sir.
We are adjourned.